Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is part 1 of our story. If you like this what if story and want to see part 2, let me know in the comments below. Before we start, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends. Also, check the description for more great content and my playlist. This story was posted by kemonokko on Wattpad. Now let's start. The world isn't fair. I learned that at the ripe old age of 4 years old. Sorry kid, it's not happening, you don't have a quirk. Such a callous way of dashing a child's dream, thought young 𝐒𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 as he sat at the computer table playing the old video of All Might's debut, that great smile of his lighting up such a dark time in the world's history. Izuku wanted nothing more than to be like him. There had to be a way, right? Izuku turned to his mother standing in the doorway. I can still be a hero, right mom? He asked his mother 𝗏𝐻𝐿, who stepped forward into the light of the computer screen, unshed tears in her eyes before she spoke as she kneeled in front of her. Yes Izuku, yes you can, but you'll have to work hard, harder than everyone else. Can you do that Izuku? 𝗏𝐻𝐿 asked, her green eyes staring into her son's. Izuku didn't hesitate, shaking his head violently. Yes mom, I'll work hard, so hard. Izuku said, looking into his mom's eyes with renewed vigor and hope. 𝗏𝐻𝐿 nodded as she wiped Izuku's face of tears before doing the same to her own and standing up. Come with me Izuku, we're going to visit an old friend of mommy's. 𝗏𝐻𝐿 said as she grabbed hold of Izuku's hand and led him out of the house, and after a cab and train ride they arrived at a small home dojo. 𝗏𝐻𝐿 walked up to the front door and gave several knocks. They waited a few moments before the door opened and a man in his 40s stepped forward. He wore a maroon gi with what looked like a turtle symbol on the left part of the chest. He had black hair and amber eyes, and boasted quite the physique. He carried a cane with him topped with a rough-hewn jade stone. Izuku pet his head looking at this man and then at his mother. Midoriya-san, it is good to see you after so long. How have you been? The man asked 𝗏𝐻𝐿, who waved her hand. Yoshi, I told you to stop calling me that. 𝗏𝐻𝐿 is fine. I'm sorry to trouble you, but I was hoping I could ask a favor of you. 𝗏𝐻𝐿 asked as Yoshi smiled, waving parent and child into his home. As you wish 𝗏𝐻𝐿, now what can I do for you and your son, I presume? He asked, looking at Izuku, who held tightly to his mother's breathed leg as they followed Yoshi into a living area and was promptly served tea. Yes, this is my son Izuku, he's 4 years old, and wants to be a hero when he grows up. Isn't that right Izuku? 𝗏𝐻𝐿 said, prompting her son to speak. Why sir, I want to be like All Might. He said, trying to smile bravely as Yoshi smiled back. That is a fine dream young man, I'll be rooting for you. And what quirk do you have, if I may ask? Yoshi said, watching as sadness filled the boy's eyes. I don't have a quirk, but I still want to be a hero. Izuku said defiantly. Yoshi leaned back, looking over at 𝗏𝐻𝐿, getting a sense of what his old friend wanted. We were hoping you could help with that Yoshi, after all you're quirkless yourself, but that never stopped you from doing what was right. 𝗏𝐻𝐿 said, staring into Yoshi's eyes before bowing before him. Hamato Yoshi, please help my son achieve his dream. Izuku looked at his mom before mirroring her gesture. Please Mr. Yoshi, I don't want to give up, I promise I'll work hard, I won't quit. Yoshi looked between both greenettes and sighed. Izuku, this will be hard work, it'll be painful and you will get hurt. I'm not a gentle teacher. Yoshi said, standing up as Izuku raised his head. If we do this, there's no going back, this will take all you have and more. Do you understand? Izuku stared into Yoshi's eyes. Yes sensei. Yoshi smiled and looked to 𝗏𝐻𝐿. I will do what I can 𝗏𝐻𝐿, but I can't make any promises. 𝗏𝐻𝐿 rose from her position and smiled, shaking Yoshi's hand and kissing him on the cheek. Thank you senpai. 𝗏𝐻𝐿 said before looking around. I never asked how are the boys and 𝗏𝐿 doing. Yoshi rolled his eyes. Being teenagers and driving me crazy. They should have been back already. He said, grabbing his walking stick and smacking it against a table leg. They will feel my disappointment. He growled before looking at Izuku. Starting tomorrow you will come here every day after school and train under me, is that understood? Izuku promptly saluted. Yes sensei. Both adults chuckled as 𝗏𝐻𝐿 left with her son. It was just then that Yoshi heard a creak and threw his cane, smacking someone in the head. Ow dad. Yoshi walked forward. If you think that hurt, just wait until you see the training I'll put you through. 10 years later, a boy moves through the crowd like water without so much as jostling a single shoulder until he was at the front of the crowd watching as a giant villain was about to be apprehended by the upcoming hero 𝐀𝐮𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬 colored wrappings, red and blue on the right and orange and purple on the green-haired boy whipped out a notebook with "Hero Analysis for the Future number 13" on the cover. An older man with a trio of 3 pointed protrusions coming from his head jumped, not having noticed the boy until he heard the mumbling, and wondered when he'd gotten there. "What are you, kid, a ninja fanboy?" the guy asked as the young boy turned, looking at him and smiled brightly. "Believe it or not, you're not far off the mark," he said, turning back to see 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫's preemptive binding lacquer chain prison be cut short as a new heroine stole his thunder. 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫. Izuku turned away as to not be blinded by the army of paparazzi taking pictures of 𝗀𝗚𝐿ady's best feature. He began taking notes on the heroine as the man who'd spoken to him before began speaking. "Let me guess, kid, you want to be a hero, don't you?" he asked, to which Izuku looked up and smirked. "I will be a hero," he said simply before disappearing into the crowd heading to his middle school. Izuku walked into class without any notice except by one boy with spiky blonde hair and red eyes. Izuku took his seat as the teacher came in to start class. "All right, class, this is your last year of middle school. It's time to start thinking about your future professions." "Oh, who am I kidding? You all want to be heroes, right?" the teacher asked as the class exploded with their quirks. Izuku just continued taking notes as the commotion was cut through by the voice of 𝗀𝗧𝗟𝗘. "Oi, teach, don't lump me in with this gutter trash. I'm the only person coming out of this school as a hero." This immediately started a backlash among the other students. "That's right, Bakugo, applied to you, right?" The angry retorts were replaced by awe at the fact 𝗀𝗧𝗟𝗘 was applying to the hardest hero school in the country. "Yes, 𝐀𝐮𝐿ady's, I'm going places you plebs could never reach." He laughed arrogantly. Izuku also applied to UA. The teacher spoke, not having noticed Izuku until right at that moment, and felt guilty for outing the poor boy. The class immediately turned to Izuku, not having noticed he was there until then. Izuku looked up from his notebook. The class didn't know what to make of Izuku. It was common knowledge the boy was quirkless, and yet he managed to keep stride with the top students, and even more impressive, he survived Katsuki's bullying without ever getting injured. The kid was a walking miracle, so maybe he did have a chance to get in. "That's right, sensei," he said, simply ignoring the disbelieving looks on his fellow students' faces. Class continued on after that until the final bell rang, and Izuku began gathering his things before kicking his leg out from under his desk and tripping, Bakugo making him explode the floor rather than Izuku's desktop as he gathered his things and stood up. "Where do you think you're going, Deku? I've got something to say to you," Katsuki shouted, standing up angrily, his palms smoking. "You're making fun of me, right? Thinking a quirkless 𝗧𝗟𝗘 like you could ever get into WhatIf." Izuku looked at Katsuki over his shoulder, gripping his bag tightly. "Contrary to your belief, Katsuki, not everything everyone does has something to do with you. I'm applying to UA because I want to be a hero, simple as that. You don't factor at all," he said, walking towards the door only for it to be blocked by Bakugo's goons. Izuku sighed as he heard running footsteps behind him before dodging to the side at the last moment as Katsuki's hand exploded, shrouding the room in smoke. The three boys coughed as the smoke cleared out of the room from an open window, revealing Izuku to be long gone. Katsuki ran to the window, seeing Izuku walking out of the school gates as if nothing had happened. "I'll get you, you fing nerd," Katsuki shouted. Izuku couldn't help but chuckle at the said look on Katsuki's face as he left the school grounds. I really wish Katsuki would get his head out of his butt and think about what he says more. Izuku spoke as his phone rang, announcing a text. He pulled out his phone in its all-mic case. He'd received a text from Mikey. "Dude, we're getting pizza, wanna hang?" The text read, and Izuku smiled, typing a quick affirmative. He looked around, deciding to take a shortcut to the dojo by cutting through this tunnel. 10 months left and I'll be at UA. I should up my training, Izuku said, pondering how exactly to do that. For the past 10 years he'd been training with Yoshi-sensei to increase his overall physical capabilities. Strength training, endurance, and martial arts. His training was already extreme, to say the least. Yoshi-sensei was as good as his word all those years ago. Maybe I'll finally take Raph up on his offer of extra training. Izuku said as he heard a rumble coming from the manhole cover he'd just passed. He turned, seeing living sludge spew up from it and shoot straight towards him. Izuku's training kicked in immediately as he gripped his backpack and ducked under the tendrils rolling to the side as he reached into his bag and pulled out a pair of long, slender, blunt wooden sticks. They were nondescript to be sure, but that didn't make them any less effective. Izuku stood up as the sludge coalesced into a single form and took notice of the armed young man in front of him. "You're making this way too hard, kid, but if that's how you want it." The sludge spoke. A thick tendril of sludge shot towards him. Izuku spun both sticks in his hands at full speed, eviscerating the slime as it splattered across the nearby walls before hooking his foot into his bag and hurling it at the sludge villain, who swatted it aside only to find his quarry gone before he was hit in the eye with some kind of powder. "Aha!" The sludge villain reeled back, covering his eyes as he began swinging sludge tendrils in a blind rage, slamming into the walls and ceiling of the tunnel as Izuku skillfully dodged the tentacles. "I can't believe it, I'm actually taking on someone with a quirk and winning," Izuku thought to himself as he took a deep breath, focusing only on the villain in front of him. Izuku rushed forward before taking notice of the person standing behind the villain and took action by dodging to the side, hugging the wall as "Texas Smash" rang out in the tunnel. The slime villain was plastered across the asphalt instantly as Izuku detached from the wall of the tunnel. Izuku knew that voice anywhere as he came face to face with All Might. "Young man, I must say you handled yourself quite well against that villain. I must apologize for letting him escape, but navigating sewers is quite difficult," All Might said as he began gathering the unconscious slime into a 2-liter empty soda bottle. Izuku was floored. This was his hero, the hero All Might, standing in front of him and apologizing no less. "I have the perfect apology," All Might spoke, taking notice of Izuku's bag on the ground and the notebook therein with his name on the front. He flipped through the pages looking for some empty space and casually glancing through the notes the boy had made about certain heroes before finding 2 empty pages and scrawled his autograph across it and handing it back to him. "There you are, young man," All Might said, handing over the autograph journal and stowing away the villain for the police. "Now if you'll excuse me, I'll hand this evildoer over to the police," All Might said before Izuku spoke. I don't have a quirk, but I'm still trying to be a hero. Do you think I can?" Izuku asked, looking into All Might's eyes. The number 1 hero looked at this boy with wide eyes. He took on a villain even though he was quirkless, and did a hell of a job as well. All Might bit his lip as he looked the boy over. "Your skills are indeed impressive, but there are some things that skill alone can't overcome. I'm sorry, young man," All Might said before jumping into the air, unaware that the captured villain had fallen from his pocket as he landed on a rooftop, exposing his weakened form. That kid was really skilled, and he could definitely go places. Maybe he could dash, he thought, rubbing his chin as he reached down to his pocket, finding that his prisoner was gone. Oh no. 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 walked down a side alley, still ranting about Deku's escape. "Fing nerd thinks he's so smart. The next time I see him, I'll make sure to blow him inside out," Bakugo said as he saw a bottle on the ground and kicked it, sending it slamming into the wall and spilling its contents across the ground, only for said contents to turn into a sentient slime creature. Izuku walked along, shaking his head. I know he was only saying what he thought was right, but still, Izuku said, clenching his fist as an explosion went off across the street from him. "Oh, what now?" he said, crossing the street and slipping to the front of the crowd, and what he found shocked him. It was the slime villain again. "What's he doing free? I thought All Might had him," he whispered as several heroes worked to subdue the villain. "He's got a hostage, and with all these explosions going off, nobody can get close," a couple of spectators said. "Wait, explosions?" Izuku asked as the sludge villain turned around, revealing he was trying to possess Katsuki. Izuku grit his teeth as he rushed forward past the cordon of heroes towards the villain. "Stop, kid!" someone shouted, but it fell on deaf ears. Izuku was focused only on the task at hand as he grabbed his 2 sticks and hurled them at the villain's eyes, watching as he recoiled from the blows to his eyes and releasing Katsuki some as Izuku gripped Katsuki and pulled with all his might. "You again, 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐚𝐫𝐲, your luck just ran out." The villain yelled as a giant sludge hand came to smack Izuku into the concrete, only for it to be blocked at the last moment by All Might. "We have to stop meeting like this, young man," All Might said before striking back at the villain. Detroit Smash. The wind from All Might's attack blew away any and all sludge from the two boys as All Might kept them from flying away. The crowd looked at the hole punched into the clouds before it began to rain. Amazing! The crowd cheered as All Might let go of Izuku. "You might want to get out of here, young man, those heroes don't look too happy with you." Izuku looked behind. All Might seeing Death Arms and 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 coming for him and took the pro-hero's advice and made a run for it before either hero could stop him. Izuku sighed, pulling out his phone, seeing several missed texts from the guys and a dozen missed calls from his mother. "Yeah, guess I'll have to miss out on the pizza this time," he said, sending an apology to his sibling disciples before preparing to call his mother as All Might zoomed out in front of him like a living freight train. "I am here," he shouted before suddenly shrinking into a much smaller and friendlier man hacking up B. "Oh my god, are you all right, sir? Do you need a hospital?" Izuku said, reaching towards him. "Are you All Might?" Izuku said, looking the man over, seeing similarities besides the fact this guy looked like a walking corpse. "You would be correct, young man, I am indeed the symbol of peace, All Might, and this is my true form." Izuku was reeling at this revelation, trying to connect the mighty symbol of peace to this frail skeletal figure. How is this possible?" Izuku asked as All Might wiped his mouth. "You see this?" he asked, raising his white t-shirt to reveal a gruesome wound in his side. "I got this about 5 years back. Lost my entire stomach and half my respiratory system. I can only do hero work about 3 hours a day now. I rushed off without giving you a proper answer before because I was short on time. By the time I got to the scene of that incident with the sludge villain, I was already out of time, and then there you were in the thick of it trying your hardest to help that boy, and it moved me to action. You, Izuku Midoriya, shall take on my quirk and succeed me as the symbol of peace. Do you accept?" All Might asked, holding his hand out to Izuku. Izuku was in shock. Could this really be happening? The hero of peace offering him his quirk. How was that possible, and why him? All these questions buzzed through Izuku's mind like a kicked beehive. After all this time, all the hard work I've put in, the blood, sweat, and tears have given me this. Izuku grabbed All Might's hand tightly. "Yes, I accept." All Might smiled and nodded, clapping the boy on the shoulder. "No hesitation, I like that. Meet me tomorrow at Dagobah Beach, I'll explain everything and then your training will begin." Izuku nodded as he let go of All Might's hand, the two parting ways. Izuku headed back home to his worried mother and explained that he simply lost track of time wandering around the city. It was better than the alternative of telling her the whole truth and possibly have her pass out from shock. He went to his room, doing the last of his workout routine and homework for the day before calling it a night. Izuku ended the call with Hamato-sensei. It was hard telling him that he wouldn't be able to train with him anymore, but unsurprisingly Yoshi seemed completely fine with it and even encouraged him to strike out on his own. "I wish I could tell you the truth, sensei, but even I don't know what that is," he said to himself as he left the kitchen after having cleaned up after his breakfast. His mother wasn't up yet, the sun wasn't even up yet, but he couldn't wait any longer. He tore off a sticky note, writing a quick missive to his mother explaining he was leaving for early morning training, and stuck it to the plastic-wrapped plate he'd left for his mother. He'd wanted to do something nice for his mother. After all, she made him breakfast every day without fail, and though he lacked her exceptional culinary skills, he wasn't terrible in the kitchen. Izuku was dressed in a green muscle shirt that exaggerated his muscular frame. No one would accuse him of being a bodybuilder, but he was in great shape, a definitive six-pack molded flush against the fabric of the shirt. He had on a pair of jean shorts and his trademark red shoes. Izuku walked out the front door, locking it behind him as he stretched in the pre-dawn hours before taking off at a loping jog towards Dagobah Beach. Izuku pounded the pavement, cocooned in the early morning silence before the city came to life. He'd been in his run for more than an hour when he passed by a boy probably a handful of years older than himself. Izuku knew a lookout when he saw one, but pretended to ignore the other youth as he ran down the sidewalk past him and rounded the corner, stopping once he was out of sight. "I wonder what he's up to," Izuku said, looking up the side of the building he'd rounded, and smiled before beginning to climb the wall of the building. It wasn't easy, no, but Hamato-sensei had taught him how to climb such surfaces, and soon he was on the roof of said building and walked across it to look down into the alleyway the guy had been guarding, and his eyes widened at what he saw. "Look what we have here," the lead thug said. He was tall with hair that seemed to be made of slime that oozed down to his shoulders. "What's a girl like you doing out here?" he asked, grabbing hold of nothing. If it wasn't for the set of clothes floating in midair, there would be no indication a person was there, and judging from the skinny jeans and tank top, it was a girl. "Let me go, please." A feminine voice rang out as the girl struggled against the grip of Uza's goons. One looked like a mind flayer straight from D&D, and the other had a long serpentine tail and a forked tongue. "Sorry honey, I can't do that, you see me and the boys have a burning question. When we stick our PPS in you, will we still be able to see them?" Uz laughed at his disgusting remark as Lizard flicked his tongue out against what he assumed was the girl's cheek. "And there's only one way to find out, right?" he asked, reaching forward to the button on her jeans. "No OMB." Right as the girl went to call out, a tentacle wrapped around her neck, choking off her scream. Izuku had seen enough. He took in all the information he could and then vaulted off the roof, falling right on Uza's shoulders, dropping him to the concrete, hearing a crunch as his face impacted the cement. Squid Face and Lizard's eyes widened their shock, leaving them wide open as Izuku rolled forward off of Uz and punched Squid Face in the knee, dropping him down as Izuku rose up with a palm strike to his chin, driving his head back against the wall, knocking him unconscious. Lizard hissed, letting go of the girl as he spun, whipping his tail towards Izuku, who jumped off the wall to avoid the blow, landing in front of the lizard man and drove his elbow into his stomach, forcing all the air from him as he dropped to his knees, clutching his stomach as he curled into the fetal position. Izuku turned back to the entrance of the alley, seeing the lookout was gone. Now that there were no reinforcements coming, he turned towards the girl, only to be pulled into a spine-crushing hug. "Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you. That was terrifying. I can't imagine what would have happened if you didn't show up." Izuku awkwardly patted the girl's back. Even if he couldn't see her, the moisture on his neck let him know she was crying. "Come on, Izuku, what would All Might do?" It's alright, there's no need to think about that now. I'm here for you," he said, leading her out of the alley and into the first rays of dawn. "Midoriya Izuku, by the way," he said as the invisible girl finally detached from him, wiping her face off. "I'm Hagakure, Toru Hagakure. Thank you for helping me, Midoriya," she said, bowing to him slightly. Izuku waved his hands. "It's all right, anyone would have done the same, and please call me Izuku," he said, smiling at her. "You live around here, I'll walk you home. I don't want to leave you alone in case their lookout comes back with more guys," he said as Toru looked at him. "I'm alright, call me Toru then, Izuku, and yes, I don't live far," she said as she began to lead Izuku back to her home, stopping in front of her house gate. "Once again, thank you so much." Izuku smiled, about to tell her not to worry about it, before he felt lips on his cheek and Toru rushing off into her home. Izuku stood there for a moment, touching his cheek before remembering why he was out this morning anyway. "Oh man, I'm going to be late," he shouted as he took off towards Dagoba Beach. He arrived well after sunrise, and though All Might said to meet him in the morning, which it still was, Izuku felt as if he'd let him down. "I'm sorry, All Might, I'm late, I know, please forgive me," Izuku said, bowing repeatedly to his idol, who only laughed as he sat on top of an old refrigerator in his muscular form in a long-sleeved white t-shirt and cargo briefs. "You're earnest, I like that, but don't sweat the small stuff, young Midoriya. I asked you to come here in the morning, and by my clock it's still morning. Now let's get down to brass tacks. I told you yesterday that I would explain everything to you before we start, so you're not going in blind." Izuku nodded as he took a seat on an old space heater. All Might gave a cough before beginning his tale of one for all and all for one. Long ago, when quirks were still fairly new, there was a man who took advantage of the chaos of the time to build an army to do his bidding. That man's name was All for One, and he had the power to take quirks for himself or give them to others. He used his power and charisma to draw people to his side. The only one he couldn't convince was his younger brother, who was sickly but had a strong moral compass. All for One forced a quirk on his brother, whether as leverage or out of true concern for his brother, I'm not sure. This quirk gave his brother the ability to stockpile power, but unknown to either the younger brother did possess a quirk of his own, the power to give his quirk to others. These two quirks combined into the quirk I now have and the one you will soon inherit. One for all. And so you see, young man, this power created by evil and passed down from person to person to do good and one day rid the world of all for one once and for all. That is what one for all is, and it's the power I'll be passing on to you as the 9th holder, but before that we need to get your body ready for it, and that's why we're here. Izuku was still in a bit of shock learning about this ultimate evil with the power to take quirks, and one day he would have to fight against him. He swallowed before acknowledging what All Might had said. Get my body ready, what do you mean, and what does that have to do with this place? He asked. All Might nodded, seeing how Izuku adapted so readily to the situation at hand. It was a good sign being able to come to terms with such outlandish circumstances. Yes, you see, one for all has been passed down through 7 other people besides the original owner, each of them adding power to it, making it stronger and stronger, and all that power will be housed in you, so if you're not ready for it, it will kill you or at the very least blow your limbs off. Izuku wrapped his arms around himself at the thought of losing his limbs to such a power. It's that strong, hun? He asked, taking a deep breath. Well, I'm ready, All Might, to do whatever it takes to make this power mine. Izuku said, standing up ready for action. Good to hear, young man. For the next 10 months I'll train you in preparation for the UA entrance exams. From what I saw in the tunnels, you already have some training under your belt, so this won't be as arduous, but we'll see. Now I'll write up a training regimen for you, but the first step is for you to clear this portion of the beach of all this garbage. He said, waving around the immediate area. Izuku looked at all the large appliances and such, already thinking about how best to move each piece. Remember, this is a marathon, not a sprint. Take your time and pace yourself. Now enough talk, let's begin. Izuku jumped into motion, grabbing the space heater he'd been sitting on and hauling it off. He did this for the rest of the day until sunset, when All Might released him from training, handing him several sheets of paper that detailed his workout regimen all the way down to his sleeping hours. Not only did Izuku accomplish All Might's goal, but even went beyond, clearing the entire beach in half the time he'd given the boy. All Might walked down to the completely cleared beach, seeing Izuku practicing his martial arts stances, until he noticed All Might coming up to him in his true form, in a deep blue jacket with a scarf and jeans. Young man, you are truly surprising. You cleared the entire beach in record timing. I knew you'd probably complete it in less than 10 months. I was thinking 7 or 8, 9 at the most, but 5, way beyond my expectations. Izuku smiled wide, his eyes glowing with joy at the praise of his idol. Thank you so much, All Might. Izuku replied, stretching his arms and legs before coughing on the steam of All Might's transformation. Now that you've come this far, I believe you are ready to receive my power. Now eat this. Izuku looked at All Might as he plucked one of his silky blonde hairs and held it out to him. The teen cast his green eyes to the hair and back to All Might several times before speaking. You want me to eat your hair? He asked with a skeptical look as All Might nodded. Yes, for you to have my power you need to take in my DNA. Izuku plucked the hair from All Might's fingers and, after rolling it into a tight ball, swallowed it, shuddering heavily. Now what? Izuku asked as All Might took a battle stance. Now you survive until the power comes to you. He said before throwing a punch that Izuku barely dodged, kicking up a large swath of sand with the air from his punch. Izuku landed to the left of All Might before smiling. Yes, sir. He shouted as All Might appeared before him instantly and threw a gut punch that Izuku blocked with both his arms, feeling as if his bones would crack under the weight of the punch as he was sent sprawling backwards before rolling to the side, narrowly avoiding another blow. The sand kicked up by All Might's attack allowed him to get some space between him and the pro hero, moving stealthily through the sand shroud before it settled. I can't stay on defense, I have to attack. Steeling himself, Izuku ran forward at All Might's back, sliding between the hero's legs as he turned around to face the attack, and once behind All Might he jumped to his feet and spun on his heel, driving a kick into All Might's right side, and that's when he felt it, the power sparking to life within him and flowing outwards as he connected with All Might's side, sliding the hero across the beach before Izuku fell to the ground, clutching his leg as pain radiated through his body. Ah! He screamed, looking at his bruised and broken leg. What happened? I thought you said I was ready. He said, breathing harshly through clenched teeth as he looked at All Might in confusion. All Might transformed into his smaller form, clutching his side. I think he broke a rib with that kick. It seems I was overly optimistic, young Midoriya. You aren't ready for 100% just yet, but now that you know what it feels like to fire at all cylinders, you can dial it back to a more manageable extent, which will be the focus of these next 5 months. Right now I think it's best we get that leg of yours looked at. I think I just created a monster. All Might thought to himself as he and Izuku climbed into a cab to the hospital. 5 months later, Izuku stepped foot onto the UA campus and took a breath. He was wearing his sleeveless forest green gi and breathes with the symbol of his dojo on his back and the left side of his chest. This is it, all that training has led up to this moment, time to make it count, he said as an angry shout rang out behind him. Move it, Deku, PSS ant, real talent coming through. Katsuki shouted as he shoved past Izuku, who stepped back to avoid any contact with the explosive teenager. And a good morning to you too, Katsuki, he said, shaking his head as he started into the school, as well noticing a cute brown-haired girl walking close by. She seemed to be writing something on her palm and eating it. He smiled. It was cute, really. I should give her some calming techniques before the exams to help her focus, he thought before he lost her in the crowd and took a seat in the auditorium after getting his entrance card. He had just sat down when he felt someone squeeze him tightly around the neck. As he looked down, seeing a set of floating clothes hugging him, he said, shocked at seeing, or well, not seeing, Toru here. Fancy meeting you here, Izuku. I didn't know you were planning on going to UA too. What a coincidence, she said, taking the seat next to him as the room dimmed and Present Mike stepped on stage. Yeah, I had no idea you were planning on studying to be a hero. Small world, Izuku whispered as Toru reached and plucked his card from his loose fingertips and looked it over before huffing. We're not in the same area, that 𝐶𝐻𝐵. I really wanted to see you. See your quirk in action. I didn't get a chance to see it when we met, and you obviously know what mine is, she said, giving him his card back, to which Izuku gave an apologetic laugh. Sorry, I guess, he said, rubbing the back of his head as Present Mike went on to explain the entrance exam. There will be 3 villains, got me, each one worth 1, 2, or 3 points respectively. The exercise is simple: destroy as many villains as you can and rack up a high score. Destroy them by any means necessary, but there is no interfering with the other contestant, so no anti-hero nonsense, if you understand. Say yeah. The auditorium was silent as a grave in response to Present Mike's enthusiasm. Excuse me, sir, on this pamphlet there are 4 villains. If this is a mistake, UA should be ashamed of itself, and you two take your flirting elsewhere. Some of us are serious about studying at this illustrious academy and becoming heroes. Izuku arched a brow at this guy. He certainly was a stickler, and unknown to either of them, Toru was making faces at the JRK with glasses. Present Mike cleared his throat to gain the attention of all the future students. Nice catch there. That 4th villain is more of an obstacle. Think of him like a natural disaster, something best avoided if at all possible. Now, if there are no other questions, go to your designated battlegrounds. Give it your all plus ultra. They all dispersed to their battlefields. Izuku stood in front of a massive gate as he looked around at all the other applicants, not recognizing anyone except there was that girl he noticed in the crowd earlier. She seemed even more nervous than before, and now might be the best time to offer her a breathing exercise or two to help calm and center herself, but right as he stepped forward, a heavy hand fell on his shoulder. So are you planning to sabotage her from the start by interfering with her warm-up exercise? Izuku looked up into the face of the guy who'd called him and Toru out at the assembly. Is it your policy to jump to conclusions about people you've just met? He asked, swiping the boy's large palm off his shoulder as the gates to the training field opened. There are no countdowns in battle. Go, 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 shouted Present Mike as from the middle of the crowd a green light shot forward, leaving the rest in its dust as Izuku barreled into the battleground, jumping up onto one of the buildings, taking note of the terrain and all nearby enemies and formulating a plan of attack. All right, one for all, let's do this, he said as he closed his eyes and let one for all flow through his body, green lightning arcing around and cloaking his body. One for all, full cowl, he said, stepping off the edge and running down the side of the building before dive-bombing onto one robot, causing an explosion that shattered the windows around him. Izuku snatched the shards of glass out of the air as he ran forward and hurled the shards, impaling 3 robots as he passed by before they exploded. The other applicants looked on shocked at the speed in which Izuku racked up points before they too joined in the fray, desperately trying to catch up. In a monitoring room, All Might stood in the back, never taking his eyes off Izuku as he put his training to the test. He couldn't keep the proud smile off his face until he felt a whack to his shin. "Oh, recovery girl, why?" he shouted, hopping on one leg as he clutched his shin. "Wipe that smile off your face, or have you forgotten how many times I had to come patch the two of you up?" The elderly lady in a doctor's coat and eye shield huffed. "I told you I'm sorry we both got out of hand back then, but there's no need to worry now. He knows his limits," All Might said as he turned back to the screen just as the principal released the boss of this game. Izuku punched through a robot, jumping back from the explosion and chopping through the neck of another robot as he landed, watching it fall backwards and erupt in smoke. He was covered in a light sheen of sweat as he did some quick math. "I should be at 97, just 3 more and I'll have an even 100. He said, jumping up the side of a nearby building to take stock of how many enemies were left before the ground began to rumble and an immense shadow swept over him. He looked up, seeing the natural disaster they were supposed to avoid. "Natural disaster? That's more like a cataclysmic event," he shouted, shocked at the size of it. He was about to get out of the way of this thing before he heard a scream and looked down to see that brown-haired girl from earlier. She seemed to be trapped under some debris caused by the appearance of the zero-pointer. "I can't run," he said, turning to face the giant robot, and felt his face break into the widest smile ever. "Shishishi, well, let's see if I can stop a natural disaster with a punch." Izuku thought he'd feel more fear or anxiety, but all he could feel was excitement. He crouched down, channeling his full cowl into his legs before jumping upwards, cracking the roof he'd been standing on as he rocketed upwards towards the robot's face. He remembered what All Might had told him about using one for all. "Clench your buttocks and scream from the bottom of your heart, smash." Izuku took a deep breath and, right as got eye level with the bot and went to scream out smash, something in the back of his mind shouted as well. Izuku reared back, feeling one for all gather in his arm. "Pistol smash." Izuku drove his fist into the robot's face, caving it in as explosions burst from multiple parts of the robot's body as he began to fall, laughing at first before he realized what was happening and looked for a way to slow his descent. Right before he hit the ground, someone slapped him across the face and immediately stopped his fall midair, before he was dropped to the ground and saw the cute girl with brown hair smile at him and then vomit on the pavement. Thanks for that. For some reason I thought I'd be fine hitting the pavement until I realized I wouldn't be," he said as she gave a thumbs up, continuing to empty her guts. Izuku stood up, looking at his hand and arm, seeing some light bruising, and knew at least one bone in his arm was broken. "DMN went past my limit," he said as Recovery Girl came forward, handing out candy until she got to him and slapped his shin with her cane, causing him to yelp. "Know your limits, do ya? Yeah, right," she huffed before healing his arm and taking the girl with her to ease her nausea. Izuku followed the rest of the applicants out of the arena before heading home. The faculty said it'd take a week or so before he'd get word on whether or not he passed the entrance exam. He was heading out of the school when someone jumped on his back. He looked up and saw Sky, knowing it was Hagakure. "So how'd you do, Izuku?" she asked, hopping off his back and walking beside him. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I had 97 points, but then I took out that big robot that we were all supposed to avoid, so I don't know if that'll count against me for not following directions," he said, sighing as Toru looked at him shocked. There had been one of those big guys in her area too, and she'd run like heck until time ran out, but he'd gone and destroyed it. "That was insane." "You're amazing, Izuku," she said, vibrating with excitement before she grabbed his hand and pulled a pen from her purse and scrawled a number across his palm. "That's my number. You call me right after you get your acceptance letter, understand? The very second after you read it," she said, letting go of his hand before rushing off. Izuku looked at his hand and then at the retreating figure of Toru. "I'm okay," he said as he headed home. The next week was the longest of his life, filled with exercise and repeated mailbox checks. He'd called Hamato-sensei to tell him how the exam went and was told by the guys they'd throw him a party when he got accepted. He smiled at the thought. He'd also been texting Toru, or well, more like being bombarded with Toru's machine gun texts. It was like for every one he sent there was another 10 from her. He was pretty sure the strongest part of his body was his thumb now. As Izuku was lost in thought, his mother scrambled into the house with a letter as if she'd wrested it from the hands of some evil organization that was hot on her trail. "Izuku, it's here, why your AC acceptance letter," she said, holding out the envelope to him. He looked at it as if it was a vicious animal ready to rip his throat out before he grabbed it and retreated to his room. Izuku took a deep breath before tearing open the envelope, revealing a small disc that began playing a hologram of All Might in his buff form and a yellow pinstriped suit. "Greetings, young Midoriya, sorry I haven't been in touch this last week. Is crossing TS and all that. Now I know you're on pins and needles and I'll answer your question right after you see this." The screen shifted from All Might to an image of the girl he'd saved. She was talking to Present Mike. "I heard him say he only needed 3 points to pass and yet he gave that up to save me. I have to pay him back somehow. Can you give him some of my points? It's not fair, he was so close and lost it because of me," she said, clenching her eyes against her tears before Present Mike put his hand on her head. "Don't worry about him, he's doing just fine with the points he has, there's no need to give him yours." The screen shifted back to All Might smiling as always in front of Izuku's passing score. How could a school of heroism reject someone for such a heroic act? "You Midoriya have made it, welcome to UA Your Hero Academia." The screen cut off soon after that as Izuku stood in his darkened room, tears spilling down his face as he turned and opened the door, finding his mother pacing in front of it, and snatched her into a tight hug. I did it, Mom, I made it," he said, squeezing her tightly as the two cried happily into the other. "My Medrobot doctor. Wow, your ideas are really in-depth, so thanks for your input. It's got me thinking a lot about what I take from which heroes. 𝗧𝗜𝗧𝗟𝗘? Well, I hadn't thought of an anti-hero Deku, but now that you mention I just might have to try it. And I'm so glad you noticed the Splinter intro. I didn't know who to put as Izuku's MT, or it was between him and Samurai Jack, but I decided on Splinter. Once again, thanks for the suggestions and keep them coming, you guys help shape this story. Too happy reading." Izuku walked out of Hamato Dojo, turning around and giving a bow to his sensei and his sibling disciples, his brothers and sister. Yoshi, Leo, Raph, Donnie, Mikey, and Miwa all felt like family to him. He didn't know where he'd be without them. Unlike their father 𝐴𝐻𝑎R, Splinter's sons did have quirks. Apparently the 4 of them were quadruplets he'd adopted during his time in America and shared the quirk Kappa. They were all anthropomorphic turtles. Miwa was his biological daughter from his wife, who passed shortly after giving birth to her. She also possessed a quirk, Lamia. From the waist down, Miwa had a white snake body, while from the waist up she was humanoid with scales on her arms and even sported the forked tongue, vertical pupils, and fangs. "Thank you so much, Hamato-sensei, for everything. I'll try to come by on the weekends to continue my training and see you guys." Splinter smiled, patting Izuku's shoulder. "It was my pleasure to train you, Izuku. You're like one of my own, and I look forward to the things you will accomplish in the future," Splinter said, smiling as he presented Izuku with a medallion with the Hamato symbol. It looked like a turtle with 4 circles on the shell. "I gave each of my children one of these when they graduated, and now I give this to you," he said, placing it around Izuku's neck before making way for his sons and daughter to see Izuku off. Leonardo came up and handed Izuku a small book. Being the oldest means being a leader, and it's the same for being a hero. The whole country looks up to the #1 hero, so I figured this book might help. It got me through some of our rougher ordeals. Hopefully it will do the same for you. Izuku read the title of the book, Perfection: The Pointless Pursuit. "Nobody is perfect, you will make mistakes, and I hope this will help you learn from them and keep pushing forward," Leo said, bowing slightly to Izuku as Izuku did the same. Yeah, move it," Raphael said, pushing Leo to the side as he gave Izuku a new pair of Eskrima sticks. "These should be able to handle that new strength of yours, and Donnie may have tetched them out a bit," Raph said before slugging Izuku in the arm. "Knock him dead, kid," he said before walking away as Donatello came forward shaking his head. "Sorry about our resident brute. Anyway, I talked with your mother about your hero costume and well, I hope you like it," he said, holding out a briefcase and then dropped a very thick book onto it. "And this is the instruction manual, everything you need to know about the suit. Read it, memorize it." Bible," Donnie said, punctuating each of the last 4 words with a slap to the book. "I think he gets it, Donnie," Mikey said, vaulting between the two, and smiled before pulling out a box. This, my friend, is the limited edition SDCC exclusive box set of us when we were heroes in America, bro. Izuku's eyes nearly burst from his skull as he looked at the collectible. Mikey, I can't accept this, it's worth over $500. Izuku said, trying to give it back, but Mikey refused. Don't sweat it, little bro, we all got one, but the brothers just gave them to me, so I have spares. He said, smiling as he put both hands on Izuku's shoulder. I, the holy 𝗀𝗱𝗪, bless your endeavor, my brother. He said before tearing up. I promised myself I wouldn't cry. He shouted before dropping a smoke bomb and disappearing, although his crying could still be heard from outside. Miwa sighed. He's so dramatic, here you go. She said, handing him a white snake ring. For luck, she said simply before slithering away as Izuku stared at the ring and smiled to himself, tearing up as he slid the ring on and looked at the five of them. Thank you so much. He said, bowing one last time and then leaving, putting Rafa's and Mikey's gifts into his bag alongside Donnie's instruction manual, and hefted both case and gym bag as he left. He had somewhere else to go before heading home. Tomorrow would be the start of UA, and he wanted to pay his respects to everyone who helped and encouraged him. He made his way to Dagobah Beach and saw All Might in his small form. He'd called the hero last night asking to meet with him this morning, and All Might had agreed. Izuku walked up to All Might, setting down the briefcase and gym bag. Thank you for meeting with me, All Might, I know you must be busy. Izuku said, bowing as All Might waved it off. You are my pupil and successor, Izuku. If I have time, you are always my priority. Now I think I know why you called me here, and there is no reason to worry, young Midoriya. I had nothing to do with you getting into UA. You did it on your merits and yours alone, so there's no reason to doubt yourself. All Might said, placing a hand on Izuku's shoulder as the young boy shook his head. Oh no, All Might, I would never assume you would break the rules for me. The reason I called you here was to thank you properly. I always wanted to be a hero and I strove for it, pushing myself in my training, but I always knew that there was a greater chance of me not getting in without a quirk. Nobody thought I could do it except my sensei and my mother, but then you came along. The symbol of peace, and you gave me your quirk. I'm so thankful, and I want you to know I will do whatever it takes to make it to the top. I won't give up. Izuku shouted, punching his fist into the air and smiling as wide as possible. All Might transformed into his buff form, his blue t-shirt stretching tight across his muscular frame. Ha, that's what I want to hear, young Midoriya. Go forth and show the world that you are here. All Might said, punching his fist into the air as well, stirring the sand from the beach as the morning sun shone upon them both. Izuku said his goodbyes to All Might before heading home, seeing his mother waiting on him. Welcome home, Izuku. Did you have fun with Splinter and his family? She asked, hugging her son as he walked in, kicking off his shoes. I'm home, Mom, and yeah, the guys sent me off with a bang. He said, smiling as he hugged his mother, picking her up off her feet, a little startling her some. Izuku, put me down, stop showing off. She said playfully, slapping his back as he set her down. I just wanted to say thank you, Mom. You believed in me when no one else did, and you did everything to help me on my dream no matter what. Introducing me to a Mr. Hamato, helping me stick to my diet my UA instructor gave me. You've always been there for me, and I want you to know I appreciate it so much and I love you. Izuku said, looking at his mother as she teared up quickly, the tears streaming down her face like a river as he hugged him. You don't have to thank me, Izuku. It's my job. No matter what you do, I will always believe in you. Izuku opened his eyes as he stood outside the door of Class 1A and took a deep breath before releasing it. This is it, the start of my journey to being a hero. No matter what happens, I just have to remember the people who put their faith in me. Images of Hamato and his family, All Might, and his mother rolled through his head as he opened the door and walked in on an argument. You there, get your feet off that desk right now. You are disrespecting the history this desk has seen and all the future students who will inhabit it. Shouted the glasses guy who called out him and Toru during the exam ceremony and jumped to conclusions about what he had planned for the brown-haired girl who he saw was in the back of the classroom, and when their eyes met, her face flushed and she looked away from him. Get off my butt and get the stick out of yours, Four Eyes. There won't be any future students after me because once I become the top hero they won't need anybody else. Shouted Katsuki Bakugo, his winning personality at full force this morning. Izuku thought about intervening before he sensed someone approaching him and turning through his arms out to catch none other than Toru before spinning with her in his arms as she giggled before he sat her down on her feet next to him. "Izuku, you caught me." Toru giggled, glad she was invisible so nobody could see her blushing like a stop sign. "Sorry Toru, you caught me off guard," he said before a pair of black eyes engulfed his vision. "Toru, Izuku first name basis already. You move fast, stud, no wonder you were the top scorer in the entrance exam." Izuku took a step back to see who was talking to him. It was a pink-skinned girl with frizzy pink hair and horns with black mascara and yellow eyes. "Oh, checking me out already, slow down buddy, you don't even know my name. It's Mina Ishido by the way, Izuku," she said, eyeing him like a lioness before Katsuki interjected himself. "Deku, the top scorer, that's a load of horsey," Katsuki said, rushing over to stand face to face with Deku. "What's this SHT about you taking out a 0-pointer, Deku? What did you do, bribe the judges? Blackmail some of these guys with those creepy notebooks of yours?" Katsuki shouted before a voice was heard at the doorway. "It's too early for this nonsense, sit down and be quiet, class is in session." They all turned to see a sentient sleeping bag talking to them. The sleeping bag or man inside it stood and unzipped it as everyone took their seats. He reached into his pocket and clicked a stopwatch. "My name is 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐴, I'm your homeroom teacher. In the time it took you to quiet down, hundreds of lives could have been lost if this were a hero situation. You all have no DSPN, but I'm going to change that. We're going to have a quirk assessment test and the bottom scorer will be expelled." There was uproar from all the students as the boy with glasses stood up. "That is completely unreasonable, you can't just expel us as you please." Their teacher gave a manic smile as a sadistic light shone in his eyes. "Guess we'll see about that, won't we?" he asked as a shiver went through the students. "Put your gym clothes on and meet me out on the sports field, and be quick about it," he said, leaving out the door as the boys and girls split off to their respective dressing rooms. Izuku took off his clothes, the medallion given to him by Enfar Splinter and Miwa's ring dangling against his bare chest as he began putting on his gym breathes when someone spoke to him. It was a blonde boy with a large tail with a blonde tuft at the tip. "You're a student of Hamato Yoshi, correct?" he said, pointing at Izuku's medallion. "I saw your medallion and thought I'd ask." "Yes, I'm Izuku Midoriya. Do you know Mr. Hamato?" Izuku asked, slipping on his gym shirt, hiding his necklace from view. "I know of Mr. Hamato from my own Mr. He praises Mr. Hamato as a warrior and skilled teacher. I'm Masahiro Ojiro, nice to meet you, Midoriya," he said with a warm smile as the two shook hands. "And I am Tenya Ida, we took the entrance exam together and I want to say I am sorry for my behavior. Obviously you had no ill intentions for that girl and saw through to the deeper meaning of the exam. I am truly sorry for my behavior," the boy with glasses said, performing a perfect 90-degree bow. Izuku shook his head. "Forget it, we were all on edge and I can't be mad at you for trying to look out for someone else. Just, give people a little more faith," he said, patting Ida's shoulder as they left the locker room gathering on the sports field. "All right, now that you're all here, we're going to do a series of physical tests in which you will use your quirks to get the best score possible," he said before looking at Midoriya and tossing the ball to him. "You go first, throw this ball as hard as you can. I'll measure its distance with this. Do whatever you need to as long as you don't leave the circle," he said, pointing to the circle on the ground as Izuku walked into it and took a deep breath before green energy roiled around him. He took a pitcher's stance before hurling the ball as hard as he could. Aizawa looked at the readout screen of his device before turning it to show Izuku had hurled the ball 750 metric tons. The other students' eyes went wide at this as Izuku moved back to his standing position. "Nice one, Izuku," Toru said, squeezing his arm against her chest, Izuku's arm being squished in between her breasts, causing the other students to blush and one short boy with purple spheres for hair to bite his lip in a jealous rage. "Next is you," Aizawa said, cutting through the levity of the moment as he tossed another ball to Katsuki. He stepped forward, glaring at Izuku before hurling the ball with a massive explosion. Die. The ball rocketed upward into the sky and out of sight. Aizawa showed off Bakuga's score, showing he'd only thrown the ball 705 metric tons. He growled, his palms smoking as he glared at Deku. This doesn't mean Deku I'll beat your butt in everything else. He shouted, stepping out of the circle as the test continued with the remaining 18 students, but all were astonished when the girl Izuku had saved during the entrance exam revealed to be 𝐻𝐿𝐼 scored infinity, putting all scores to shame before moving on to the next test, a 50-meter dash. Everyone seemed to have adjusted to the pressure of the test, adapting to the intensity of the moment, until Izuku and Katsuki stood at the starting line of the 50-meter dash. The pressure seemed to ratchet up through the roof, the very air becoming heavy under the tension between Izuku and Katsuki until the starting signal blared, releasing all that tension into forward movement between the two. Katsuki blasted forward like a horizontal rocket while Izuku pushed off the ground, leaving indentions of his shoes in the ground, soaring forward as a green bolt. The twos take off, blasting air into the crowd of students, nearly blowing away the purple-haired boy. But as quickly as it had started, it was over, with Katsuki crossing the line with a time of 4:13 and Izuku right on his tail with a time of 4. "What did I tell you, Deku? I'm going to crush you in every test," Katsuki shouted, walking away as Izuku watched him go. He shook his head as he thought, "I need to up my reaction time against Bakugo or an equally fast opponent. Me activating full cowl takes too long." The others watched the two boys in awe. The quirk assessment didn't seem to matter to them in the least compared to whatever they had against one another. Their mentality seemed to infect everyone, making them all push themselves harder. "The fated battle of rivals starts here," stated 𝐻𝐿𝐼 as the next two stepped up to the starting line. In the end, 𝗫𝐿𝐼 took the top spot with a time of 3 seconds. The rest of the tests seemed to follow suit, with Bakugo and Midoriya competing with one another rather than just trying to pass the test. In the grip test, the top scorers were Izuku with an even 600 kilograms of force and 𝐒𝐿𝐼 behind him with 540 kilograms. Katsuki raged at the overwhelming defeat, vowing to beat him in the next test, but wound up tying with Izuku as both cleared the sandbox, even though Izuku landed farther than Katsuki. Neither gained a foothold in the next test, seeing as how the purple dwarf destroyed the record for repeated side jumps. The three remaining tests were of no consequence to the two, as they were sure they both were going to be far from the bottom. "Alright, testing is done, and since it would be irrational to call out your scores one at a time, I'll put them all up here," he said, pressing a button on a remote that called up a hologram with all 20 test scores. Izuku looked and smiled, seeing that he was in the top 5. The scores went from Momo Yaoyorozu, Izuku Midoriya, Shoto Todoroki, Katsuki Bakugo, 𝐻𝐿𝐼, Fumikiage Tokoyami, 𝐬𝐿𝐼, Masahiro Ager, Ejiro Kirishima, Mina Ishido, 𝐻𝐿𝐼, Koji Koda, Rikido Sato, Tsuyu Azui, Yuga Oyama, 𝐴ntosiro, Denki Kaminari, Kyoka Jiro, Toru Hagakure, and Minoru Mineta being dead last. The poor boy looked shell-shocked, his very soul attempting to leave his body as Toru hugged Izuku. "I was so close to being eliminated, Izuku," she shouted, sobbing against his chest in joy. It's okay, Toru, you passed in the end, that's all that matters," he said, patting her head awkwardly as some of the guys glared at him, and the girls gave a unanimous "ah," blushing at the tenderness between the two. "Oh man, I so want me some of that," Mina shouted, pumping her fists up and down jealously, saying what all the girls in the class were thinking. "Oh yeah, that whole expelling the lowest scoring student was a necessary deception. No one is going anywhere as of yet," Aizawa said, smiling. "Go back and get into your uniforms, you still have the rest of the day, so I wouldn't rest on your laurels. Any of the other teachers could do something like similar and they might not be lying," he said, walking away as the students gave a huge gulp. "Aizawa, you're quite the liar. You have no problem expelling students, so what happened this time?" All Might said, looking at Aizawa, who rounded the corner. The massive man had been hiding behind sporting yellow pinstripe suit. Aizawa cast a lazy gaze to All Might. "You're right, I would have expelled the last place student or all of them with no problem. The only thing that stopped me was those two," he said, pointing at Izuku and Katsuki, who seemed to be arguing while 𝐻𝐿𝐼 tried to break it up. "Those two didn't give a damn about my test. It was all about pushing past the other, which made the others want to push past them. They inspired the other students to overcome their fear and do their best. That's what we need in heroes," he said simply before walking away from All Might, who smiled his trademark grin. "You're a kind man in your own way, Aizawa." The school day was over, and after 𝗏𝗧𝗟-sensei had put them through, Izuku was more than ready to call it a day. He walked out of the locker room, spotting Ojiro next to the door. "Do you have a moment, Midoriya?" Ojiro asked as Izuku nodded. "Sure thing, Masahiro. What can I do for you?" he asked as Ojiro smiled. "Feel free to call me Ojiro for starters, but I wanted to know if you wouldn't mind sparring with me from time to time. My Mr. has the deepest respect for Mr. Hamato, and I would like to face one of his students. You know, iron sharpens iron dash, and brother sharpens brother." Izuku finished for him before holding his fist out to Ojiro. "Of course, Ojiro, I'd be honored to spar with you, and call me Izuku," he said as Ojiro bumped his fist against Izuku's. The two exchanged contact info and agreed to train at Dagobah Beach at the end of the week. Izuku smiled seeing Ojiro leave and walked out soon after, stopping at his shoe locker to grab his sneakers. He walked towards the front door only to be pulled into a shadowy corner. He immediately went on the defensive, grabbing hold of the person's wrist only to see that it was Uraraka wearing a pained expression. "I'm so sorry, Uraraka-san, I just reacted," he said, rubbing the back of his head in embarrassment as Uraraka smiled bashfully, her eyes darting to and away from his. "It was my fault, I shouldn't have grabbed you like that. I am just wanted to talk to you alone." Izuku nodded, thinking about what this could be about. "Thank you for talking to the teachers on my behalf, Uraraka-san, I really appreciate it. That was really nice of you," he said, smiling at her as he saw her eyes shine with unshed tears before she chuckled, wiping her eyes. "I was going to thank you for saving me during the entrance exam. You risked everything for me and now you're thanking me. You really are a nice guy, Midoriya," she said, wiping her face before looking at Izuku and pressing her lips to his. Izuku was caught off guard. It was like some had shut off his brain. He just stood there as Uraraka kissed him. As quickly as it had started, it was over. "Like I said, thank you," she said before rushing off. Izuku stood there in the shadow of the entryway of the school with a finger to his lips as he listened to Uraraka's retreating footsteps. It felt like an eternity before Izuku walked out of the school building and heading home. Unknown to either, there had been someone else there and she had seen everything. "So that's how it is then, alright, I'm all in," she said, leaving the school once she was sure Izuku was gone, and headed home to plan her own strategy to capture the green net for herself. Izuku's head was in a fog after what happened yesterday after school. He'd brushed his teeth last night and this morning, and he could still taste Uraraka on his lips. Not that he'd been trying to get rid of her taste, he wasn't sure he ever wanted to not taste her. His face was as red as a tomato and people were taking notice. Toru walked over as they sat in class waiting for their teacher to show up. Apparently today was hero study and they had a special instructor for the class. "Izuku, are you okay?" Toru asked, placing a hand on his shoulder, causing the boy to jump. "Oh, hi Toru. No, I am fine, just I'm excited for class today, didn't sleep much last night," he explained, hoping that would ease Toru's concern. "Or maybe you were up last night dreaming of a special girl and that's why you couldn't sleep. Had to get up early and change the sheets, hun. Boys sure have it rough," Mina said, sitting on Izuku's desk, causing the boy to start sweating. "See here now, that is not a subject to be discussed in the classroom of all places, and it's Midoriya's personal business. You should respect that, Ishido-san," Tenya said, coming to Izuku's rescue. Mina shrugged as she slid off Izuku's desk, her skirt hiking itself up as she did so, flashing Izuku a bit of her black and blue striped panties before it fell back into place. "Calm down, Ida, maybe if you relieved some of that stress more often you'd be more chill. It's not healthy to hold back. Right, Midori?" Mina said as she walked back to her desk as Toru fumed some, also heading back to her desk. All the while Uraraka sat with her head in her hands, her face scarlet as her thoughts were consumed of images of Izuku doing that while imagining her. "Oh no, Izuku wouldn't do that, he's too nice, but what if he did? I wonder what he imagined us doing." Uraraka felt something wet hit her desk and looked down at a drop of blood. She reached to her face, realizing her nose was bleeding. She quickly reached for a tissue as the classroom door opened, only to reveal All Might himself in his Silver Age costume, no less. "I'm here to teach," he announced as the class was engulfed in awe of his presence. "It's All Might, can you believe it?" shouted a red-headed kid with sharpened teeth. "Yes, it is most incroyable," said a blonde boy with sparkles in his eyes. Yes students, it is I All Might here to teach your hero studies class, but before that I'd like you all to introduce yourself and your quirks in seating order. I'm sure with all that tension on the first day you didn't have a chance to get acquainted. He said, waving his hand at the blonde boy with the perfect hair. He stood up waving his hands at the entire class. My name is 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐸𝐴, my most marvelous quirk is navel laser. He said in a French accent, flipping his hair in the most grandiose way possible before sitting down. Next was Mina. My name is Mina Ishido and my quirk is acid. I can produce acid from my skin that can eat through almost anything, she said, smiling with a wink before sitting back down. The next was a girl with long green hair and the most impressive poker face anyone had ever seen. I'm 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐴, please call me Tsu. My quirk is frog and I can do pretty much anything a frog can. Stick to surfaces, shoot my tongue out to 20 meters, jump extreme distances and such, she said before sitting down just as calmly. Next to stand was Ida, his arms bent at perfect right angles as he spoke in a clipped manner. I am Tenya Ida, my quirk is engine. The engines in my calf allow me to augment my running speed. It is a pleasure to meet you all and thank you All Might for allowing us this proper introduction. You are truly a studious man, he said before bowing to their teacher, who scratched his cheek bashfully. You're welcome, young Ida. Man, I'm doing great at this teacher thing, All Might thought pridefully as the next student introduced herself. Achiko stood up, taking a deep breath, casting an eye at Izuku to see he was looking to and away from her with a blush on his face. My name is Achiko Uraraka, my quirk is zero gravity. By touching something with all the pads on my fingers I can make something weightless until I release it by touching my pads together again. Achiko sat down quickly, looking to Izuku to see he was writing in a notebook and noticed he switched to a new page as each student introduced their power. Wonder what he's doing, she thought as the next person stood. My name is Masahiro Ojiro, my quirk is tail, he said as he flexed his tail, seeing it bulge with muscles before sitting again. The next was a blonde boy with a black lightning streak through his hair. Hello ladies, the name's Denki Kaminari, quirk electrification. In other words, I'll give you a shocking experience, he said, winking at all the girls in the room, earning a series of amused faces as he sat down. Giving a cough, the red-headed boy who spoke out first stood up. I'm Ijiro Kirishima, my quirk is hardening. I can make my skin like stone. He, as his hand became rigid before he released it and sat down. The next boy stood up. He had a rock-like head and in his hands a piece of paper that read, Koji Koda Quirkani voice. Can speak to and control animals with my voice. He quickly sat down as if the act of standing was too outgoing for him. The next to stand was a muscular boy with brown hair and thick lips. Rikido Sato, quirk sugar rush. The more sugar I eat the stronger I get, but my intelligence goes down accordingly. After Sato was the tallest boy in class with silver hair covering one eye and a mask across his face. One of his nubs became a mouth to speak for him. My name is Mizo Shoji, my quirk is dupli arms. I can replicate any part of my body with one of them. Nice to meet you, he said with a small bow before sitting back down. A girl took his place and stood with purple hair and earphone jacks trailing from her earlobes, one of which she was twirling with her finger. Kyoka Jiro, quirk earphone jack. I can plug my jacks into almost anything and then blast my heartbeat into it, even directly into someone's brain, she said, casting a vicious eye to Denki and the purple short stack, who both gave a loud gulp. After her was a black-haired boy with a wide smile and long arms. I'm 𝐻𝗏𝗄𝐴 and my quirk allows me to shoot a tape-like material out of my elbows, he said, giving a salute to the class as he sat down. After him was the most unique of all the students. A boy with a crow's head stood up. You may address me as 𝐵𝐵𝐻𝗏𝗄𝐴 Tokoyami. My quirk is dark shadow. I have a sentient shadow beast within me that I use to do my bidding. As if to demonstrate, said shadow beast came from his stomach, giving a thumbs up. Yep, that's me, it said before disappearing as quickly as it came. Once Tokoyami sat down. After Tokoyami stood a boy with two-tone white and red hair and blue and gray eyes. He had a large burn mark over his left eye. Shoto Todoroki, quirk, half hot, half cold. I use fire with my left side and ice with my right. His face never changed and his voice was as flat as 2-day-old open soda. Toru took his place, her uniform vibrating with excited energy. I'm Toru Hagakure. My quirk is invisibility, and no, it's not voluntary. I've been invisible since the day I was born. It's so nice to share a class with you guys. Let's do our best, she said, giggling happily before sitting down. Izuku placed his hands over his ears for what came next, knowing what Bakugo would do, and since he sat right behind him, he didn't want to go deaf at such a young age. Listen up, all you scrubs, because I'm only going to say this SHT once. I'm Katsuki Bakugo Quirk Explosion. In other words, I'll turn you F-airs into ash in a heartbeat if you get in my way. Especially you, Deku. Katsuki said, turning around to face Izuku, who was taking his hands off his ears. Even with that precaution, he could still hear Katsuki clear as day. He sighed as he stood up. Duly noted, Katsuki. Hello, I'm Izuku Midoriya. My quirk is stockpile, he said, casting an eye at All Might, who gave an imperceptible nod. I store energy in my body and then use that stored energy to augment myself, such as my enhanced strength. I look forward to spending the next few years with all of you, he said with a small bow before sitting down. Everyone was surprised to hear Izuku speak so eloquently after seeing him compete so fiercely with Katsuki. They had assumed the two were more alike, but it was like night and day. Midoriya and All Might had talked about what to call his quirk. Since One for All was a secret, he had to come up with something believable that explained everything, so to avoid lying outright they decided to just reveal the stockpile part of the quirk. The shortest kid in the class stood up, his purple spheres shining in the classroom light. I'm Mineta Minoru. My quirk is Pop Off. I can take these balls off my head and stick them to anything. Depending on how healthy I am, they might stay for a whole day, he said, tossing the ball repeatedly in his hand. They also don't stick to me. I want to get to know all of you, especially all the girls, he said, a dark gleam in his eyes that sent a shiver through all the girls in class as he sat down. Giving a polite cough, the last student stood up, her figure drawing the eyes of most of the students, not to mention her perfect appearance, from her coiffed hair styled into a bountiful ponytail and her perfectly pressed uniform. She was the vision of order and decorum and spoke just as well. My name is Momo Yaoyorozu. My quirk is creation. I can create any non-organic object given that I know enough about its structure. Pleasure to meet you all, she said, taking her seat once more as All Might clapped. Wonderful. Wonderful. Now that you all know a little about each other, I hope you begin to grow your relationships as well as your quirks. Now get dressed, he said as he pressed a button and small doors sprang out from the left wall with each student's number on them. The support companies worked HRD on your specific costumes, and now we'll put them and you to the test. Get into your costumes and meet me at testing ground beta for your lesson, he said before opening the door and running full speed away, kicking up a small dust storm as he did so, leaving his class to get ready for whatever the pro hero had in store for them. All Might stood at the entrance to training ground beta as he heard footsteps and saw the students approaching in their hero costumes. Yuga appeared in something akin to knight armor with a violet sparkling cape. His belt also seemed to be modified more than his usual, and on his face was a red wing-shaped visor. He seemed to shift position every few seconds to show off how magnificent his suit was on him. Mina came out in a purple and turquoise skin-tight bodysuit combined with a vest with fur along the collar and a white mask. Tsuyu's suit was also skin-tight, colored black and green with yellow frog markings, with goggles on her head and heels that mimicked frog feet. Whereas Yuga only took the knight motif so far, Ida went all the way, wearing full-body silver-colored armor with engine pipes along his legs and a helmet that fully covered his head except his eyes. Achiko's suit was a skin-tight bodysuit colored black and pink with large cuffs around her wrists and pink boots with cushioned heels. Izuku could hardly take his eyes off her until he heard Mineta say how awesome this school was. He looked at the boy and shook his head, not sure whether to be impressed by his brazenness about his perversion or pity him for the brutal retribution he would no doubt receive in the future. Mineta was in a full purple bodysuit that came up over his head as a mask with yellow gloves, boots and cape. Izuku saw that Ojiro was sticking to his roots and simplicity, dressed in a karate gi with a fur collar and a hole for his tail. Izuku nodded at his friend's choice of hero attire. Denki wore an open black jacket with white lightning patterns, a white shirt underneath with black breathes with white lines down the legs, boots, and some kind of communicator on his head. 𝐻𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 wore a wired guard over his face and two dark red gear-shaped shoulder pads, a belt with a red R in the center of it, baggy black breeds, and a half cape with a ripped hem with black boots. 𝐻𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 wore a dark yellow and red bodysuit with matching suit, with his hero symbol being a set of teeth in the center of his chest. 𝐼𝐾𝐻𝐾 wore a yellow full bodysuit that transitioned into a half face mask where his brown hair stuck out from a seam atop his head, and white gloves and boots. Shoji's costume was a two-tone blue sleeveless shirt that extended upwards onto his face, ending right below his eyes. The bottom of his suit was a bronze belt around light blue breeds that were tucked into dark blue boots. 𝐻𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 wore a black leather jacket, ripped pink shirt underneath black breeds, and boots with speakers along the front, and a pair of white fingerless gloves with speakers along the back of her hands, with headphones on her ears, red triangles under her eyes, and a black choker around her slender neck. 𝐒𝐮𝐿 wore a black and white full-body suit with a yellow helmet that looked similar to a tape dispenser with a black full-face visor. The sleeves of his costume were cut short, and he wore white boots with shoulder pads matching his elbows. 𝐻𝐻𝐾𝐻𝐵 wore a black full-body cape and black boots. Todoroki wore a shite long-sleeved shirt with matching breathes, while the left half of his suit from head to toe seemed to be encased in ice with one glowing red eye. Izuku was a little embarrassed to see that Toru's costume was a pair of light blue boots and gloves, meaning that Toru was standing there naked. Invisible or not, that was a brave choice in hero attire. Izuku saw that Katsuki's suit was as intimidating as he would expect. A black sleeveless tank top with an orange X across his chest. His entire forearm was encased in gauntlets that looked like old-fashioned grenades, with the actual things adorning his belt. He wore brutal-looking knee pads that were sure to leave a mark on whoever they landed, with baggy breeds and combat boots with a black and orange mask with flared ends. Momo's costume was the most eye-catching, a simple red leotard with a large orange belt on the back of which rested an encyclopedia and matching red boots. Izuku's costume was a dark green full-body suit, while on the back there were darker green patches forming a turtle shell pattern. A green wrap-around mask adorned the top of his head, the remaining fabric flowing around the back of his head. His forearms were encased in black gauntlets with bracers and reinforced knuckles. He had on black combat boots, and on his outer thighs was a holster for both of his 𝐒𝐮𝐴 sticks. He also wore a utility belt around his waist with numerous compartments. "Wow, Izuku, who made your suit? It's awesome, man," Kirishima said as Izuku smiled. "Oh, my brother Donnie has his own support company. He and my mom worked together on designing this," he said as the other students took notice. "You all look amazing, super heroic." All Might shouted happily before getting down to the lesson. "Alright, you zygotes, listen up. Today will be a mock indoor battle between two-person teams. Hostage situations, underground deals, illegal trafficking, all these take place inside buildings under unknown conditions. The premise of this foundational training will be as such. The villains will be guarding a WMD that the heroes will be trying to secure by either capturing the villains with this capture tape." All Might held up several rolls of tape between his fingers. "Or by securing the WMD, of course the villains need only keep control of the weapon until time runs out, or capture the heroes. Your teams will be chosen at random via these two boxes. No, come up and grab hold of your destiny." All Might said loudly as the kids all wore expressions of over-the-top much. Izuku was walking back from drawing his lot and passed by Toru, who he bumped into, feeling something squish against his arm. He jumped back, waving his hands in apology. "So sorry, Toru, I didn't see you there," he said, unsure of how that would go over. "No problem, Midoriya, I'm usually more visual than I am now, don't worry about it," she said as she walked forward and drew her lot. There was another accident with the girls later on. Jiro tripped over Toru, dragging both into falling into Mina and Uraraka, but other than that there were no other mishaps before the team was revealed. The first team up would be Midoriya and Jiro as the heroes versus Tenya and Bakugo as the villains. Izuku looked over, locking eyes with Bakugo, who wore a vicious smile. "So it's been decided, Jiro and Midoriya will take on Tenya and Bakugo. The villains will get a 5-minute head start to set up before the heroes are sent in, everyone else to the monitoring room to watch." All Might announced as Tenya and Bakugo entered the building, leaving Jiro and Izuku outside to wait for the signal. In the monitoring room, Mina, Toru and Uraraka were fuming, each having saw Izuku's letter when he apologized to Toru for bumping into her. The three had then each tried to get the right one, but before any of them could check their lot, Toru and Jiro had fallen on them, making them drop their lots, which meant that they couldn't be sure who actually had the right lot. Not that it mattered now, since Jiro was with Izuku. Izuku breathed a sigh of relief. He was still too shaken up about what happened with him and Uraraka. If he had been partnered with her, he wouldn't have been able to concentrate on the battle to come. He looked over to Jiro and smiled, holding out his hand. "Jiro-san, right? I'm glad to be working with you. Let's win this thing," he said as Jiro looked at him with an inscrutable gaze before shaking his hand. "You're really into this, aren't you? Or is it because you just want to beat Bakugo? What is it with you two?" she asked, letting go of his hand as the starting signal rang and the two walked into the building. The moment Izuku stepped into the building, Jiro felt a change in him. It was like he was hyper-focused. The look in his eyes sent a chill down her spine and heat through her core. It was like she was standing next to a lion. She bit her lip at the danger Izuku seemed to exude as her face blushed. "I and Bakugo were friends for most of our childhood, but when he got his quirk he changed and started acting like a bully. I distanced myself from him and focused on my training, which only upset him more, and he began picking fights with me. I always tried to avoid that outcome, but now I have a chance to show him a better way and hopefully change him before it's too late." Jiro smirked. "You really are a hero trying to save Dash." Izuku lunged towards Jiro, wrapping his arms around her as he pulled her out of the way of an explosion caused by Bakugo, who wiped away the smoke, looking at Izuku, who was on top of Jiro, who lay on her back on the floor. Jiro was blushing madly as she stared at Izuku, who had his eyes on Bakugo. She could feel the heat off his body and smell whatever body wash he was using. It smelt so good she felt like wrapping her arms around. She rubbed her thighs together. In the monitoring room, Kirishima could be heard complaining. "A sneak attack, Bakugo, not manly at all, bro," he said, punching his fists together before he felt a wave of malice behind him. He looked over to see Mina and Uraraka with intense glares on their face, and though he couldn't be sure, it seemed like Toru was equally furious. "See, you guys get it too. That's no way for a man to fight," Kirishima said, feeling validated by the girl's outrage. Izuku stood up, helping Jiro to her feet. "Jiro, I know we didn't really have time to come up with a plan, but for now just try to locate Ida and the bomb. I'll hold off Bakugo and then come meet you," he said as Jiro nodded, running off as Izuku and Bakugo stared each other down. "Just you and me, Deku. It's time for me to grind you to dust like the shitty pebble you are," he shouted, launching himself at Izuku with a right hook, only for Izuku to catch his arm, spin on his heel, and slam him into the ground hard, knocking the wind from him. "I know everything about you, Katsuki. You thought you were tormenting me these last few years, but you were actually giving me the best training I could ask for. You always start a fight with a big right hook," Izuku said as he stood above Katsuki, only to have Katsuki jump to his feet and unleash an explosion towards Izuku, only to find the green net gone. "Now it's time I put that knowledge to use," Izuku spoke from the shadows. "Whoa, look at those moves. Midori's really full of surprises," Mina said as the other students agreed before watching the smoke disappear from Bakugo's explosion, only to find Izuku gone. Everyone began scanning the many camera screens, not finding a trace of the green hero in training. "He disappeared," Mineta said, looking around at the screens. The only one not surprised was Ojiro, who said nothing and continued to watch. Izuku was hidden in a shadowy corner as he whispered in his communicator to Jiro. "Jiro, are you okay?" he asked before hearing a reply from the sound girl. "Yeah, I'm good, thanks for the save back there. You doing good over there?" she asked as she moved through corridors, stopping to jam her ear jack into the walls, making sure she wouldn't be ambushed by Ida. "I'm fine, I've got Katsuki trained on me. Now I have plan if you want to hear it," Izuku said, peeping around his corner, seeing Bakugo angrily combing the hallways for him. "I don't have a lot of time before he does something drastic," Izuku thought to himself as Jiro gave her reply. "Yeah, you seem to have this dialed in, so what do you need from me?" she asked as she made her way up a staircase. "Find Ida, he's no doubt guarding the bomb. I'll try to capture Bakugo and meet up with you. It's the only way. If I leave Bakugo alone, he'll know and no doubt come to Ida knowing I'll be there, and with his explosions it's more likely the WMD will be blown apart rather than captured. I want you to monitor Ida as studious as he is. He's not going to leave that bomb's side. Once you find him, I'll give you a signal to enact the finishing part of our plan. Jiro nodded as she listened to Izuku's plan with a smile. I can totally do that, dude, just let me know when. She said, smiling as she quickly climbed the stairs. This was going to be so rocking. In the monitoring room, All Might fiddled with the camera controls, switching it over to infrared to find where Izuku was hiding, but just as he did, Izuku appeared above Bakugo, dropping down on him with an axe kick that the blonde blocked with his sizable gauntlet, before blasting another explosion engulfing the two in smoke. Hit and run tactics. Deku cow dash. Katsuki received a kick to his right knee, dropping him into a kneeling position before he countered with another explosion, only to receive a stick to his left cheek, sliding him across the floor before he jumped to his feet. Where you? Bakugo shouted, unleashing a spinning explosion ring around himself, but once he stopped he felt a kick to his chin, launching him into the air before he backflipped in midair, launching an explosion straight down. Izuku dodged the explosion, feeling the heat off it as he slid back into the smoke. His eyes were closed as he listened for Katsuki to land. Splinter had taught him how to fight without his eyes. It was necessity for his training. He placed a palm to the ground as he felt the vibration of Katsuki landing and running to where he'd last seen Izuku. Izuku stood up, moving slowly as he listened to Katsuki's heavy breathing before swinging at the back of his head with both of his Eskrima sticks, only for Katsuki to dodge and blast towards his stomach, which Izuku kicked to the side, bathing them both in smoke as he jumped over Katsuki, bringing both his sticks down on his back, dropping Katsuki to the ground before jumping back into the smoke. The hallway was completely bathed in smoke. The cameras could only tell what was happening because of the infrared. How is he doing that? It's like he's teleporting. I know Izuku said he had been trained in martial arts from a young age, but he never said that it taught him how to do this. Sato said before looking at Ojiro. Hey 𝗏𝗡𝗡, you said that you knew Izuku's dojo. Can you explain what he's doing? Sato pointed at the screen as Izuku seemed to appear out of thin air and narrowly miss a roundhouse kick to Bakugo's head. I'm not all that familiar with this technique. This is my first time seeing it in person. Izuku trained under Mr. Hamato Yoshi, a genius in the school of ninjutsu. My Emister has though, and he said it's called phantom movement or shadow stepping. Moving silently around your opponent to disorient them before delivering a series of strategic blows to bring them down. I've heard that this technique was derived from a much deadlier ancient technique where the user can kill their opponent in total silence that the victim doesn't even know they're dead. It was called the silent killing. The entire class gasped at that piece of information. Midoriya's a ninja, no freaking way. Siro shouted, looking at the screen like a child at a new toy. I don't know, man, ninjas don't fight like real men. You should engage your opponent face to face, no tricks. Kirishima said, crossing his arms in disagreement. What, no way, ninjas are awesome, they can sneak into anywhere like a girl's dressing room dash. Mineta was cut off by Tsu's tongue slapping him across the face. Midoriya's not a pervert like that. Toru shouted before All Might clapped for their attention. Now students, I can't say whether I agree or disagree with Midoriya's methods, but it is important to take advantage of everything a situation gives you. Who can tell me what Midoriya's strategy is utilizing? He asked as Momo raised her hand alongside Ojiro. Yaoyorozu-san. All Might called out. Yes, Midoriya-san is taking advantage of his past with Bakugo, allowing him to guess what Bakugo will do next. He's also taking advantage of the smoke from Bakugo's explosion, allowing him to outmaneuver Bakugo, though I can't explain how he moves so well since the smoke blinds him as well. I will attribute that to his ninja training. Finally, Bakugo's temper and stubbornness are also in Midoriya's favor. Instead of Bakugo retreating to a more advantageous area, he's choosing to tough it out, hoping to gain the upper hand while wasting precious energy. She said, making air quotes around the phrase tough it out. All Might smiled weakly at Momo's perfect assessment. Yes, well, very good, Yaoyorozu, but you can't discount Bakugo's unwillingness to give up. There's always a way to turn any situation to your favor if you're patient and remain calm. Bakugo stood breathing in the middle of the nearly destroyed hallway, his body bruised and covered in sweat. His gauntlet glowed red for a second as he smiled before running to the end of the hall, placing his back against the wall. Now there's no escape, Deku. I'm going to blow you away. He shouted, pulling back the trigger on his gauntlet, releasing a pull pin. I hope you're ready to die. 𝐻𝐿𝐴 shouted, releasing an explosive wave down the hall, but the powerful explosion was too much for the already wrecked hallway. The ceiling collapsed under the force of the explosion. 𝐻𝐿𝐴 watched the ceiling break apart above him. As it began falling, he was snatched out of the way by none other than Izuku, who slammed him to the ground, wrapping the capture tape around his wrists behind his back. You idiot, what were you doing? Izuku shouted, hoisting Katsuki up. Was it really that important for you to beat me? You'd put all of us in danger. He asked, dropping Katsuki to the ground as the boy looked up at him with anger. Why didn't you use your Quirk One? Katsuki shouted. What, you think you're so much better than me you can beat me without it? I'm the best, Deku, you're nothing. Izuku looked at Katsuki, shaking his head. I just beat you, Katsuki, you're captured, but that's not what this was about. I didn't use my quirk because you did all the work for me. I wanted to show you what your pride will do to you and your career if you don't wake up. Izuku said, dragging Katsuki to the destroyed portion of the building. What if that had fallen on your, or worse, you brought the entire building down on all of us? Is that what a hero does, destroys everything around him? You're an amazing person, Katsuki, you always have been, but your pride is going to hold you back or worse, destroy you. Izuku dropped Katsuki in front of the rubble. I guess it's my fault too, I shouldn't have let this drag out as long as it did. I suppose I wanted to get back at you for all the bullying and I was wrong for that. Look, we're not friends, I don't think we ever were, but maybe we can be. I respect you, Katsuki, I do, but this the way you are now, this isn't going to help you. Izuku said before running off to execute the last of his plan, leaving Katsuki in the rubble of his arrogance. Ida was standing in the top floor room in front of the bomb as the entire building rumbled. 𝐻𝐿𝐴, what was that? 𝐻𝐿𝐴, come in. Ida shouted into his communicator, getting no answer until All Might's voice rang out over the PA system. 𝐻𝐿𝐴 has been captured. Ida sighed, thinking something like this might happen as he remembered 𝐻𝐿𝐴's ranting. That loser thinks he can F with me. I'll show him, put him in his place just like before. Ida shook his head as he got ready for a 2-on-1 battle. In the name of villainy, I will not let this weapon go. On the outside of the door, Jiro rolled her eyes. This guy takes himself way too seriously. At that moment, Jiro heard Izuku's voice in her ear. Jiro, I'm in position, ready when you are. Jiro smiled as she plugged her jacks into the door, blasting it open as she looked to Ida. Give it up, hero, you will never get this weapon from me. Ida shouted as Jiro plugged her jacks into each of her boots and sent out 2 pulses of sound into the room, shattering the glass in the room as Ida raced towards her. Ha, I knew you might try that, so I stuffed my ears with paper. He shouted as he jumped into the air, going for an engine-powered kick before All Might spoke on the intercom. The heroes have secured the weapon. Midoriya and Jiro, mission accomplished. Ida veered off course so as not to hit Jiro as he kicked out a portion of the wall next to her. Jiro's eyes widened in shock at the prospect of having almost been kicked by that. How? Ida said, looking back to see Izuku sitting atop the WMD. Simple, really. I had Jiro send out a massive sound wave to shatter the windows while I hung outside on the wall. I knew you wouldn't be able to hear me over Jiro's sound and would go to take her out, so I just climbed in one of the broken windows and well, here we are. Though if I had known you stuffed your ears with paper, I probably would have just had her climb in a window, seeing as you wouldn't have been able to hear her anyway. Ida hung his head in shame before taking off his helmet and looking and smiling at Midoriya. You really are quite the strategist, Midoriya. Midoriya shook his head. Yeah, but I should have been here sooner instead of dragging out my battle with Katsuki. He said as the 3 of them exited the building, with Katsuki bringing up the rear as they entered the control room. Midoriya, that was awesome, you have to teach me how to sneak like the Dash. Mineta was stepped on as the rest of the class gathered around the winning team. Midoriya, how did you do all that disappearing stuff, and those moves were really cool, man. Siro said, nodding at the boy's agility and speed. Why didn't you tell us you were a ninja, man? Would you have to kill us if you did? Sato said, sweating a bit at the thought of Midoriya sneaking into his room to slit his throat. You and I are kindred spirits, both one with the darkness. Tokoyami said with a nod as Izuku arched a brow. Thanks guys, but we all did our best out there. I wouldn't have been able to do it without Jiro," he said, placing a hand on her shoulder as she blushed. "I was nothing, just doing my part," Jiro said, twirling one of her jacks. In the back of the room, Shoto looked at Midoriya and scowled. Incredible strength, analytical mind, peak martial arts. "I'm going to have to keep an eye on you, Midoriya Izuku," Shoto thought as All Might coughed, gaining the class's attention. "Yes, well done, Jiro and Midoriya. Now would anyone like to tell me where either team went wrong?" This time only Momo raised her hand. "Yes, Yaoyorozu," All Might said, a bit hesitant. The villain's first mistake was Bakugo splitting off by himself. He put his personal feelings above his mission to protect the WMD. Instead, he engaged in a drawn-out battle with Midoriya that collapsed a portion of the building, endangering himself, the weapon, and the other participants. Meanwhile, Midoriya dragged out the battle longer than strictly necessary, allowing for much more destruction that could have been avoided had he incapacitated Bakugo sooner. Izuku rubbed the back of his head at Momo's assessment, having come to the same conclusion himself didn't stop the evaluation from stinging any less. Once again, All Might was left with nothing to say in the face of Yaoyorozu's assessment. "Man, this girl is good. Very good, Yaoyorozu." With the first match out of the way, the other matches began in earnest, with each student getting a breakdown of their flaws in battle from Yaoyorozu, except for Todoroki and Shoji, who completely dominated their opponents in their match, leading to Toru whining against Izuku's shoulder. "I tried really hard, Izuku, you know that, right?" Toru said against his shoulder as Ojiro shook his head, disappointed at such an overwhelming defeat. "It's alright, Toru, you'll learn for next time," he said, patting her shoulder lightly as he did his best to ignore her bare bursts against his chest. He cast an eye at Todoroki, thinking of how he would have handled that in Toru's place and coming up with very few successful strategies. After class that day, Izuku waited until he could get to Uraraka alone. It was time they had it out about what happened yesterday. He found her as she was heading to the train station and grabbed hold of her hand, startling her. "I'm sorry, Uraraka, I was hoping we could talk," he asked as she gave a wordless nod. The two walked over to the side of the street as Izuku took a deep breath, only to be cut off before he started. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have kissed you." Izuku nearly swallowed his tongue as he coughed, waving his hand. No, I'm not sorry. I really enjoyed it, but I mean did you kiss me as a thank you, or was it something more?" he asked, rubbing the back of his head, biting his tongue in embarrassment at Uraraka's silence. He cracked open one eye and saw Uraraka with her hands covering her mouth and unshed tears in her eyes as she shook her head. "It was so much more. You're so kind and smart, and you're just a really good person, and I was wondering if we could go out sometime," she said, pulling her hands away from her mouth. Izuku felt his mouth moving before he even registered what she'd said. "I'd love to," he said, pulling out his phone as he and Uraraka exchanged information. Right as Izuku was getting his wits about him, Uraraka threw a stone into his gathering calm, scattering it once again. "See, can we kiss again?" Uraraka asked, placing a finger to her lips. Izuku turned so red he was pretty sure all the blood in his body just went to his head. "Well, you kiss," he said, looking at Uraraka's lip as they drew closer to his until their lips touched. She tasted even better than he remembered as he slowly wrapped an arm around her waist, hearing a small eep as he did so before she melted into him more. Her lips were so soft as they caressed his until both needed air as they broke apart. They stood there breathing, looking to and away from one another before Izuku let go of Uraraka. The two shared a bashful smile before Uraraka left, leaving Izuku alone, stepping out onto the sidewalk and noticed Toru standing there. His eyes widened in shock. Did she see us together? No, there's no way, right? But what if she did? What is she going to say? Izuku's mind was running at 100 miles an hour as Toru stepped towards him. "Izuku, you're still here?" she asked, walking up to him. Izuku breathed a sigh of relief that she hadn't seen him and Uraraka together. He didn't want Toru to see him like that. Yeah, Toru, just heading home. What about you?" he asked as Toru took his hand in both of hers. "Izuku, let's go out," she shouted all in one breath. Izuku felt like the wind was knocked out of him. I really like you, Izuku, and well, I want to know if you would go out on a date with me." Izuku was lost. In the span of 5 minutes he'd gotten 2 dates from 2 different girls. He knew what he should do, but he couldn't. Toru was his friend. Before Yue, she was probably his only friend, and he knew this took a lot of courage to say. He couldn't hurt her by rejecting her, but he also couldn't two-time on Uraraka. He didn't want to be that kind of guy. Izuku looked up, steeling himself to reject Toru's offer, and saw tears hanging in the air. Those tears in her eyes broke his resolve. "Of course I'll go out with you, Toru," he said, smiling sadly as his gut roiled in shame. Toru jumped up and down for a moment before hugging Izuku. "You won't regret this, Izuku. I'll text you everything later," she shouted excitedly, leaving Izuku feeling as if he'd swallowed Mina's acid. As Toru walked off, she scowled. "I won't let you come between us, Uraraka. You may have got the jump on me asking him out first, but I won't lose to you." Izuku had just left the house, his mind on the 2 dates he suddenly had when he was grabbed from the side and pinned against a wall by none other than Bakugo. "As if I didn't have enough on my plate," he thought as Bakugo let go of his shirt and looked at him. "Look here, I don't give a damn in what you or anyone else thinks of me. I'm still going to be the best hero there is, but you did beat me, and that will be the only time, Izuku, you hear me. I'll be the best hero in my own way, not yours, so just stay the hell out of my way," he said, walking away from Izuku. Izuku stood there frozen in thought. Did he just call me Izuku?" he asked, his brow arching as he felt a small smile on his face. "Maybe I did change your mind a little, Katsuki," he said, a feeling of accomplishment blossoming in his chest as he made his way to Yue. Izuku took his seat in class as the bell rung and Aizawa walked in. Everyone in class shared the same feeling of anxiety at seeing the erasure hero standing there. "Man, what's he going to have us do this time?" Izuku thought, his heart pounding as Aizawa began speaking. "All right, today we are going to pick the class representative and vice representative," Aizawa said as the entire class released a breath of relief before everyone started shouting for themselves to be nominated. As everyone clamored for the position, Izuku thought about whom he would pick, and the first person to come to mind would be Ida. He was logical and a steadfast upholder of doing things by the book, and Yaoyorozu would be a good partner to his unbending adherence to the rules. She was more relaxed and more likely to keep Ida from going overboard. "Everyone please, this is not how we should conduct ourselves," Ida shouted, his hand straining straight up in the air. "Ida, you want this more than anyone, it seems," Tsu said, calling out Ida's mismatched words and actions. Ida coughed, taking his hand from the air. "Yes, well, I think we should hold this to a vote. Whoever receives the most votes will be our class representative, and the secondary person will be the vice class representative," Ida explained. "But wouldn't everyone just vote for themselves? How would that work?" Kirishima questioned as Ida adjusted his glasses. "Well, yes, if everyone is selfish and only thinks of themselves, that will happen, but I believe that all of us as future heroes willing to put our lives on the line to save others are more than willing to do what's best for the class as a whole rather than for ourselves," Ida said as each student nodded. "Just get it done, I don't care how." Aizawa spoke, already in his sleeping bag after having placed an empty box on his desk. All the students took out pens and paper, writing down who they thought should be class rep and put them in the box on the teacher's desk. Aizawa stood up after everyone had handed in their votes, began sorting through them before announcing the verdict. "The class rep with 3 votes is Izuku Midoriya," Aizawa said in a lifeless voice before Katsuki stood up shouting. "Which of you BSTRDS voted for Izuku?" He reviewed the room, not being able to pick out any of the perpetrators before sitting down and growling as Uraraka whistled in the background. "With 2 votes, the vice class rep is Momo Yaoyorozu," Aizawa said as Izuku and Momo stood in front of the class. Izuku looked at the class at large. He wasn't sure about this. He'd never really wanted a leadership position, but he supposed that the book Leo gave him would be put to good use now. Are you guys sure about this? I don't really think I'm qualified for this," he said as he was met with disagreement. "What, no way bro, you've got this. I definitely trust you as our class republic," Kirishima said with a thumbs up. "Yeah, you even went so far as to try and show Bakugo what a JRK he is. If you went that far for him, I know how far you'll go for the rest of us." Jiro said, a slight blush on her face as Bakugo growled. "F you earlobes," he shouted as he seethed in his seat. Izuku nodded in acceptance. "Thank you all for the trust you have in me. I'll do my best to not let you guys down." he said with a bow to the class. After everything was made official, the rest of the day proceeded normally with Izuku sharing a table with Ida, Uraraka, and Toru at lunch. I'm glad to see you've accepted the leadership role, Midoriya. As one of the people who voted for you, I can't wait to see how you bring the class together, Ida said as Midoriya arched a brow. Well, that's ironic because I used my vote on you, Ida, Midoriya said, taking a bite of his katsudon as Ida sputtered. What, really, you thought I would be a good representative? Ida said, adjusting his glasses. Midoriya shrugged, looking at Ida. You enforced the rules, trying to keep the class on the straight and narrow. You set a good example for what a hero should be. I think that's awesome and someone I can follow without question. Ida took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes before replacing them as Uraraka smiled. Ida, don't cry, Uraraka said, patting Ida's shoulder as he smiled. No, it's just you reminded me of my older brother there. He said something similar to me once, Ida explained as Midoriya narrowed his eyes, trying to remember what he knew about Ida. You said you came from a hero family, right, Ida? Your brother wouldn't happen to be Ingenium, would he? Asked Midoriya as Ida coughed on the juice he was drinking. How did you know? Ida asked, looking at Midoriya in shock, who shrugged in return. It wasn't hard saying you came from a hero family and your engine quirk, which has been a staple in every Ingenium. It was pretty obvious, he said as alarms started to go off and students began to leave the cafeteria in a rush. Ida managed to grab hold of an upperclassman that was passing by. Excuse me, what's going on here? What are the alarms for? Ida asked as the older student explained, saying that UA's perimeter had been breached and according to procedure all students should evacuate to the designated area. Midoriya, who had been listening, waved to the class, getting them out of the cafeteria, but the moment they stepped outside, all of 1A was swept up in the raging river of the student body, trying to get out as quickly as possible. Izuku was pushed and shuffled like clothes in a dryer as he was jammed against the wall downwind of Ida, who seemed to be trying to tell everyone what was happening after looking out the window, but no one could hear him. Izuku grit his teeth as he watched Ida try to get hold of Uraraka. He didn't know what his plan was, but Izuku trusted Ida and moved forward steadily before giving Uraraka a push towards Ida, allowing her to make him float in midair before jettisoning himself through the air and landing above the exit. Everyone calm down, it's just the press outside, we are not in any danger, he shouted, calming the student body in one fell swoop. Izuku smiled as the students placidly exited the school building. On their way back to class, Izuku caught up with Ida and stopped him. Ida, I'm going to hand over the position of class rep to you after what you did at lunch. Ida held up a hand, stopping Izuku in his tracks. Midoriya, I know what you're going to say, and we both know that I wouldn't have been able to do that without your help, Ida said, eyeing Izuku down his glasses. I know you pushed Uraraka towards me in order for me to inform everyone about what was happening. That is why you would still make better class representative. You help everyone without asking for anything in return, even with no recognition. I know you'll do great, the taller boy said as he patted Izuku's shoulder and walked away. Izuku sighed, smiling at his friend's faith in him. The school day was over and he and Yaoyorozu were the last to leave after cleaning the classroom. Izuku looked over his shoulder at the taller girl. He'd seen the disappointed look on her face when it had come out he would be class rep. She really would be best for it, and he had no problem giving it to her, but it wasn't just himself he had to think about. 3 people had seen fit to put their trust in him, one of them being Ida, who wanted the position more than himself, but had turned it down even after Izuku offered it to him. Izuku took a deep breath before walking over to Yaoyorozu. Yaoyorozu, I know you really wanted the class rep position, and to be honest, I think you would be a better fit for it than me, he said, squeezing the handle of his broom tightly as Momo turned to the boy eyeing him. He wasn't wrong, she did want that position, and she really didn't know why people put so much faith in Midoriya. He was powerful, good-natured, and to be honest kinda cute with those freckles of his, but she wouldn't say he inspired confidence as a leader. I know I'm being selfish, but I want to give this my best shot even though I know I'm not all that qualified for it, but I can't let down the people who voted for me, at least not without trying, but I know I won't get anywhere without you by my side, he said, stepping closer to Yaoyorozu, who blushed at the close contact, stepping back slightly, realizing for the first time she was alone with a boy. I need you, Yaoyorozu, so please just give me a chance, But if you say no, I'll understand and hand the position over to you right now. I'd rather try with your help than stubbornly hold on to something that I know I'll fail at without you," he said, bowing his head to her. Momo's head was spinning, to say the least. Never before had she been struck with such blatant honesty. Looking at Izuku right now, she could kind of see what it was about him that made people put their trust in him. Momo sighed before she spoke. "Raise your head, Midoriya. I won't abandon you just because you got the position I wanted. I'll lend you my full support as your vice representative," she said, holding out her hand to Izuku, who shook it eagerly. "Thank you so much, Yaoyorozu. I'll try not to let you down either," he said with such a bright, honest smile. Momo felt as if she was staring at a new star as her heart skipped a beat. It was Friday night, and in a darkened room a feminine silhouette writhed on a bed, her legs squirming as her fingers massaged her core, her pelvis rising to meet the invasive digits. "Izuku!" The voice gasped in joy as the other hand massaged her beard, toying with the pert NPL as she bit her lip. Images of the green-haired boy ran rampant through her mind as she conjured images of said boy pleasuring her. Suddenly her body tensed before flopping down to the bed like a dead fish, her chest heaving as she basked in her afterglow. "Oh Izuku, I don't think I can wait any longer." The girl spoke, her face morphing into a grin of pure satisfaction. Izuku woke up that Saturday morning early as usual before the sun had even risen and taken his morning run to Dagoba Beach, his feet hitting the sand just as the sun began cresting above the horizon. He was dressed in a long-sleeve shirt and jean shorts, his trademark red sneakers on his feet as he began stretching. He was meeting Ojiro here this morning for that sparring session they'd agreed upon, but at the moment that was farthest thing from his mind right now. The only thing he could think of was the 2 dates he had with Uraraka and Toru. He was still conflicted about whether to date both of them, but the thought of rejecting either made him feel ill. "Izuku, you okay?" Ojiro asked, having called Izuku's name several times and not getting a response before clapping his hand on Izuku's shoulder, watching the green-haired boy nearly jump out of his skin. "Ojiro," Izuku said, clutching his chest as he stared at Ojiro, who wore an expression of confusion and concern. "Are you all right, Izuku? You seem distracted," Ojiro said, standing there in a plain white t-shirt and karate briefs with black and white sneakers. "Oh no, nothing really, just enjoying the sunrise, you know," Izuku said, rubbing the back of his head as he gave a nervous laugh. Ojiro turned to the rising sun as well and took a deep breath of the salty sea air. "Well, it is nice to appreciate the simple things in life," he said before doing a couple stretches and then took a fighting stance. "Are you ready?" he asked, his tail raised as Izuku nodded, taking a fighting stance as well. Both waited for a moment before Izuku struck first a straight fist to Ojiro's face, who ducked to avoid it, sweeping at Izuku's feet with his tail as the green-haired boy back flipped out of the way, landing on his feet just in time to catch a flying kick from Ojiro and threw him over his shoulder, watching the boy spiral in midair before dropping to his feet, standing there for a moment as the two stared each other down before engaging again, each throwing and blocking the other's strikes until Izuku seemed to lose focus, getting slammed in the stomach by Ojiro's tail being thrown onto his back. "Izuku, are you okay?" the blonde asked, holding his hand out to the downed boy, who took it and pulled himself into a sitting position on the sand as Ojiro took a seat next to him. "Yeah, I'm good, just lost my focus is all," he said, rubbing his stomach a little. Ojiro nodded, having felt that Izuku's head was somewhere else since he'd arrived. "That strike you used at the start was a sun fist, right?" Ojiro asked, to which Izuku nodded. "Which you countered with dragon sweeps his tail and then went into the shadowless kick," Izuku said as Ojiro nodded in agreement. "That you countered with horse drinking water. I knew you would be a good sparring partner. Now do you want to tell me what's got you in such a twist?" Ojiro asked as Izuku sighed, deciding to trust Ojiro with his problem. I have 2 dates today, with 2 different girls. I don't want to reject either, but I also don't want to string them along just to avoid a hard decision," Izuku admitted, looking at Ojiro, expecting a stand-up guy like him to call him out on such a thing. Instead, Ojiro wore a complete poker face, but as they say, still waters run deep, and though his face was placid, inside Ojiro was filled with several conflicting emotions. The first of which was happiness at his friend's apparent success with the opposite SEC, but on the other hand he was a little jealous. Within a week Izuku had gotten not 1 but 2 dates with different girls. The sting of being so outclassed was a bit much to bear. 𝗀𝐼𝐻 took a deep breath, calming himself as he thought about what to say to Izuku. Well, I'm just going to go with what I think is best. I think you should go on both dates, after all these are first dates, right? 𝗀𝐼𝐻 inquired, to which Izuku nodded in agreement. I thought as much, so I think you should just go ahead on both. After all, expecting yourself to make such an important decision without getting to know more about them is a decision doomed to failure. There's always going to be that what if feeling if you didn't go through with one. Izuku nodded his head, thinking about what 𝗀𝐼𝐻 had said, and had to admit he was right. He couldn't just shut one down without getting to know her. But wouldn't getting to know them make it that much harder to break things off with one? Izuku asked, to which 𝗀𝐼𝐻 nodded. Yes, it would, but then you'd have a clearer choice and wouldn't regret it as much, because in the end you have to choose. 𝗀𝐼𝐻 said as Izuku ran that statement around in his head before standing up. I guess so, but I don't want to keep this a secret either. I think being honest with them is for the best. Thanks 𝗀𝐼𝐻, you really helped me out. Izuku said, holding out his hand to 𝗀𝐼𝐻, who took it as he stood up. No problem, I hope things work out for you. 𝗀𝐼𝐻 said as the two shared a fist bump before Izuku went on his way. 𝗀𝐻 shook his head. Maybe I'm the one who has it easier not having to weigh other people's hearts on a scale, he said before making his way home as well. Uraraka was rushing down the sidewalk. She was so late and knew it too. She'd spent so much time trying to decide what to wear, and now she was late. I hope Midoriya hasn't been waiting long. Nice going, Uraraka, late to your first date. She chastised herself as she rounded the corner and saw Izuku standing under a tree at the entrance to the park. He was dressed in a long-sleeve shirt pattern to look like 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐴ge costume with jeans and his usual red shoes. He looked up, seeing Uraraka, and waved at her, causing the girl's heart to skip a beat as she saw his smile. I'm so sorry, Midoriya, I know I'm late, she said, clasping her hands in front of her pink and white checkered skirt, her arms framing her BRS in her cream yellow shirt. Izuku gulped, looking away from her chest and scratching the back of his head. No, I haven't been waiting long at all, he said, knowing he'd showed up an hour early just to be absolutely sure he wasn't going to be late. Uraraka smiled at his nervous lie, trying to make her feel better about being late. Oh, Izuku, you're so kind, she thought to herself as he offered his arm to her, to which she eagerly grabbed hold of. So, you said a walk in the park, right? He asked as they began making their way into the park, seeing people enjoying their Saturday, thoughts of work and school millions of miles away. Izuku had no idea what to say to break the ice as they walked down the path arm in arm until something popped into his head. Hey Uraraka, why did you decide to become a hero? I mean, your quirk could be useful probably anywhere you go. Construction would probably be the most useful place for you. Moving heavy building materials with your quirk would definitely cut down on the manpower needed and expensive equipment, he said, looking over at Uraraka, who had a wide-eyed stare on her face before she exploded. That's what I've been saying for years, she shouted, startling the green-haired boy. Uraraka covered her mouth as she blushed. Sorry, it's just my parents own a construction company, and once I got my quirk I thought the same thing you did, and they even have licenses for people to use their quirks in specialty jobs like construction and stuff, but my parents thought it wasn't a good idea. They don't want me to have to work a hard job like construction, so instead of doing that I thought if I became a hero and made lots of money I could provide for them like that, she said, blushing as she scratched her cheek. That's a bad reason to become a hero though, isn't it? She asked, hoping she hadn't come off as some money-hungry girl. I don't think so. I think that you're a great person for wanting the money to help your family. After all, it's not like you're just in it for yourself. You have a goal beyond just you, and I think that's special, he said, looking down at her as she blushed, staring into his brilliant green eyes. What about you, Midoriya? Why do you want to become a hero? Izuku smirked, thinking back to his childhood of how he wanted to be just like All Might, the symbol of peace. My reasons have changed over the years. At first it was just to be like All Might, and then it was to prove Katsuki wrong that I wasn't a Deku, but then once I helped you in the entrance exam it became clear to me. I just want to help people, no more, no less. I know what it's like to be powerless, and I want to show people who feel like that there's always something more, something better, he said before chuckling, realizing he'd been rambling. Sorry about that, Uraraka, I just got carried away. he said as he turned to her, feeling her lips on his once again. He blushed as he pressed himself against her, indulging in the moment before they pulled apart. "I'm sorry, it's just I think I fell for you all over again," 𝗬𝗏 said, blushing as they heard a whistle and looked to see a food truck owner with parfait in each hand. "You two are so sweet together. Here, have these on the house," he said as Izuku and 𝗬𝗏 each took one. "Way to go, kid," the man said, giving Izuku a thumbs up and a wink. Izuku blushed heavily as the two walked away to a bench to indulge in their sweets. Hearing 𝗬𝗏 say she had fallen for him, he knew what he had to do now before things went any further. 𝗬𝗏, I have something to tell you. I like you, I really do. I find you sweet, cute, and a caring person, but I also have another date today with someone else, and it's not that I don't care for you, but I might also care for her. I'm not sure, but I owe it to her and to us to find out if there might be something there. I don't want to have any regrets in choosing you, and I feel like if I don't do this there might be this big what if hanging over our relationship. Do you understand?" Izuku asked as 𝗬𝗏 stared down at her pastry silently. Izuku feared the worst, that he might have ruined something before it was even started, but to his shock 𝗬𝗏 turned to him with a bright smile. "I understand, Midoriya. You have to do this for us and our relationship. I totally get that, and I'm happy that you were honest with me from the beginning, but can I ask you something personal, just between us?" 𝗬𝗏 asked, turning on the most deadly pair of puppy dog eyes he'd ever seen. "Sure, go ahead," he said, swallowing. 𝗬𝗏 smiled in gratitude. "Why does Katsuki call you Deku? Is it not short for Dekairu, as in you can do it?" 𝗬𝗏 asked as Izuku sigged his teeth at the question. It wasn't something he liked talking about, but given the context that 𝗬𝗏 gave it, it showed him how nice a person she was. "Well, thanks for giving Katsuki the benefit of the doubt, but no. When I was a kid I wasn't very capable, and Katsuki thought it would be funny to change the letters of my name to mean Deku, as in worthless." Izuku balled up the empty wrapper of his parfait in frustration at his once friend's cruelty. 𝗬𝗏 frowned darkly at the realization of how many times she'd heard Katsuki say that to him. "I'm sorry for asking. I thought it sounded cool, like the name of a really great hero, and I was going to ask if I could call you that too." 𝗬𝗏 frowned at her oblivious insensitivity. Izuku smiled as he gave a laugh. "Don't worry about it, that's in the past, and sure, after what you just told me I'd be more than happy to be called Deku by you," he said as 𝗬𝗏 smiled, hugging Izuku from the side. "Oh, thank you, Deku," she said as Izuku hugged her back before they got up and exited the park, heading their separate ways. As 𝗬𝗏 walked away, she bit her thumbnail thinking about what she'd just learned. "I can only assume he was talking about Toru, but I'm not going to back down from this. Izuku told me about this date because he's obviously going to choose me. But what if he doesn't? I'll be left out in the cold. I can't take that chance, but what can I do?" she said to herself. Later that evening around 5, Izuku stared at the building in front of him, feeling as if an icy fist was gripping his insides. "Toru, are you sure about this?" he asked, staring at the blinking neon sign. Toru giggled at his side, clutching his arm to her chest as she whispered into his ear. "There's nothing to be afraid of, Izuku. I'll make sure this is the best experience of your life," she said huskily, causing the boy to shiver as she began pulling him inside. Toru walked up to the counter dressed in skinny jeans with white heels and a striped blue and white t-shirt, the outfit accentuating her full figure. Izuku swallowed, staring at Toru's but in those tight jeans as she shifted from side to side in excitement. Toru turned around quickly, spotting Izuku diverting his eyes from her, and smiled as she grabbed his arm again as they were led down a hallway and stopped in front of a door that opened into a karaoke room. Izuku was pulled inside and pushed onto the couch as Toru sat next to him, grabbing the tablet on the table and going through the songs. "Ooh, I love this song," Toru said, showing him a pop song he'd probably heard 1,000 times, but never bothered to listen to. "Well, you should definitely go first. I'm not much into music," he said as Toru started playing the song and singing along. Izuku watched, mesmerized by Toru's gyrating body as she became one with the rhythm. Even though she was invisible, he could practically see the joy on her face as she let the song move her. This is what he loved about Toru. She was infectious, propagating happiness and joy to whoever was around her. She was like a sun raining down rays of elation on everyone who was around her. Toru collapsed down next to Izuku, breathing slightly as their drinks arrived, and she took sip from her pink lemonade while Izuku swirled the straw in his soda. He watched her chest rise and fall with each breath and the way her throat moved with each swallow. He found his mouth dry as the Sahara after watching her. "You know, Izuku, I never did properly thank you for saving me," she whispered, leaning against him, her hair tickling his nose, smelling of peaches. She nuzzled against him, giggling some. "You smell good," she whispered as she placed a hand on his stomach, feeling the hard muscle there before dancing her fingers across his abs, causing Izuku to laugh. "Toru, stop, I'm ticklish," he said, grabbing her hand as the others started dancing along his ribs, causing him to fall to the side, collapsing in a fit of laughter, unable to keep Toru from climbing on top of him to continue her assault. "Say uncle," Toru said as Izuku bucked upwards, slamming his pelvis against hers, knocking the wind from her as Izuku grabbed hold of her arms, holding them at her sides. He took a deep breath to collect himself as the last of his giggles subsided. He looked up at Toru and then to where she was sitting, and his eyes grew wide before trying to move out from under her, grinding himself against her as he did so, causing her to let out a small squeak before she plopped down on the couch. "Toru, I'm sorry about that, really I am," he said as he heard Toru speak. "I felt it, Izuku," she said, sliding closer to him, breaking the boy out in a sweat. "It's okay, I don't mind really," she said, reaching toward his zipper before Izuku stopped her. "Toru, I do feel that way about you, but I don't think we should go there just yet," he said as he looked at her, holding her hand in between his. "Today I had a date with you, Rarika, and I'm going to tell you what I told her. I like both of you, but I don't know which one to choose, but I know I can't have you both. That's why I went on both these dates today, to see if I could sort this out. I like being with both of you. Toru, you were my first friend in a long time and I love being around you. You brighten up everything around you," he said, stroking her cheek as he stared into where he assumed her eyes were. "I need time to make a decision, but I wanted you to know how I felt," he said as he sighed. "It's okay, Izuku, I understand. You're such a good guy. I bet you were tying yourself in knots about this, weren't you?" she asked, cupping Izuku's face. "It's a little sad knowing I wasn't the first to ask you out, but you still said yes. You risked everything to spare my feelings by telling us both the truth. That's the reason I like you so much. You're everything I want in a boy, and even if you don't pick me, I know you'll still be the best friend I'll ever have," she said, moving forward and kissing him, wrapping her arms around his neck as she crawled into his lap and wrapped her legs around his waist. It was like she was some amorous octopus and he was her willing prey. He could feel Toru's passion invading his body and her desperation to have this moment last as long as possible. Not wanting to disappoint, Izuku squeezed Toru against him, running his hands through her hair, filling his nose with her scent as they massaged each other's lips before coming up for air. Both were breathing as Toru climbed out of his lap, rearranging her clothes as Izuku did the same, both standing up. "We should probably go, our time's almost up," he said as he opened the door for her and the duo went out into the cool night air. "Let's get you home, Toru," he said as he offered her his arm again, and the two walked off through the darkened streets before they were cut off by several familiar figures. Well, if it isn't the little 𝐶𝐻𝗔 who ambushed us and stole our test subject." Izuku looked at the one who spoke, a tall man with slime hair running down from his head. Alongside him were two other familiar faces, the lizard man and Squidface. In addition to the three were several other males, all looking at Izuku and Toru. "What a surprise meeting you again. Now I can pay you back for what you did to my face," Slime shouted, pointing at the scars across his face as the group advanced on Izuku and Toru. "Izuku, what are we going to do?" Toru asked as Izuku stayed in front of her as they were steadily corralled into a deserted alley. He clenched his fists ready for a fight until he heard something and ducked, pulling Toru with him as a spray of blood painted the walls where they had been. Slime watched in confusion as Lizard Man and Squidface fell to the ground headless. "What the F?" he shouted, looking at Izuku and Toru before turning to the rest of his group, finding them equally as dead, and a man with a red scarf and cloth mask stood there. The long, jagged blade he carried stained with blood as he looked at Slime with the intensity of the sun and coldness of a blizzard. The man moved and Izuku found himself moving as well, blocking the sword swing at the man's wrist before going for a palm strike, which the man avoided, sliding to the side and dropping his sword from the hand Izuku held, catching it with the other and swinging, making Izuku let go as he jumped back from the blade. The two stood on opposite walls of the alley. "Why would you protect this 𝐮𝐬?" The man questioned Izuku as Slime and Toru stood still. "He may be a criminal, but I can't let you kill him, even he deserves the chance to change his ways in the future," Izuku said as he and the stranger locked eyes. The stranger smiled. "Splinter has trained you well, boy, but he's still not willing to do what's necessary," the stranger said, rushing Izuku before jumping above him onto the wall and throwing a knife at Slime before climbing up the wall to the roof of the building. Izuku realized he had been faked out and activating full cowl dashed forward to grab the knife, but was too late. The knife embedded itself between Slime's eyes. Izuku watched his body fall in slow motion before hitting the ground with his face forever stuck in that shocked expression. Izuku fell to his knees as Toru came to embrace him. "Izuku, are you okay?" she asked as she pulled out her phone and called the police as Izuku stared down at the dead thug. I couldn't save him, I was right there and I couldn't keep him from being killed," he whispered to himself. This failure weighed heavy on him. How was it possible that even with this new power he couldn't keep a single person from dying? The police arrived quickly and took Izuku and Toru's statement before letting them go. As Izuku was walking away, he heard one of the officers commenting on the crime scene. "Hero killer Stain strikes again, but this is the first time he's saved someone. What's his deal? He goes around killing heroes and then suddenly decides to off some thugs. Doesn't make sense." Izuku kept that thought in mind as he said goodnight to Toru. He couldn't help but go over the fight with Stain, those moves, the way he wielded his sword, they were all known to him, and worse, he knew him or Splinter. What could it all mean? He thought to himself as he got home and went into his room, his thoughts plagued by thoughts of Stain and his inability to save that thug. "I couldn't save him, I failed," he whispered to himself as he fell asleep. Izuku looked around the space he was in. It was completely pitch black. He couldn't even see his hand in front of his face, or so he thought, until he realized that from his eyes down his body was completely blacked out, as if it was part of the room itself. He struggled trying to move his body at all, and failed, and without a mouth he couldn't even call for help wherever he was. But then suddenly he heard a multitude of voices. "Can you believe how fast this is happening? One of us will meet him soon." Izuku looked towards the source of the voice, but couldn't make anything out except some shadowy figures in the distance. "I told you he was special, believe it'll." Another voice spoke before a female voice rang out. "I know this is exciting and all, guys, but remember, he is a lot younger than any of us were when we inherited One for All. It's our job to teach him how to use this power. As such, I think that dash." Suddenly the voices were cut off as if someone had shut a door, and before Izuku stood a frail-looking man reminiscent of All Might's true form, with long hair that covered one of his eyes. The man gave a gentle smile before speaking. "Sorry about them, they're just excited about meeting you is all. I know you must have questions and I'll try to answer them in the time we have. I'm the original user of One for All, and the voices you heard before were the people One for All was handed down to," he said, giving Izuku a moment to process what he was saying before continuing at the boy's nod. "You are the most compatible person I've seen with One for All. You see, One for All isn't just a quirk, it's a collection of people's consciousness and powers. As such, it has a consciousness of its own, and it seems to like you, so much so it has started to open up to you, giving you access to its stored power and us." Izuku's head was reeling from this. All Might did tell him that One for All had been passed down to multiple people and stored their power, but nothing like this. No doubt you're asking why 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 didn't tell you this. It's because he doesn't know. One for All has never opened to anyone like it has to you. The closest I can think of was when it let me speak to Toshi's predecessor, allowing me to tell her of a change within One for All itself, but nothing like this. I just want you to know that no matter what happens, we're here for you. You are not alone, you carry all of us with you," the man said, giving a smile much like All Might's before the darkness began to recede around Izuku, pulling the strange man from him as he was moved into consciousness. Izuku opened his eyes, sitting up in bed, and yawned. He remembered fragments of his dream from before, the most notable part being, "You are not alone, you carry all of us with you." Izuku felt a smile on his face at that as he climbed out of bed and went to do his morning routine. As he went through his morning, thoughts of the fight last night ran through his head. "Stain," he said, walking out of the bathroom back into his room as he knew what he had to do today. Izuku got dressed in one of his many all-might shirts with jeans as he headed into the kitchen, seeing his mother go about making breakfast. He smiled, walking up behind her and kissing her on the cheek. "Morning, Mom," he said, sitting down at the table right as his mother set a plate of eggs and toast in front of him. "Morning, Izuku, you slept late today. Usually you're gone before I get up. That date you had yesterday must have really taken a lot out of you," 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 said, causing her son to choke on his freshly buttered toast. Izuku pounded his chest as he looked at his mother in shock. How did you know?" he gasped out, taking a sip of his orange juice to clear his throat as his mother wore a smile reminiscent of the Cheshire Cat. "I'm your mother, Izuku. I notice things like my son getting ready for a date," she said, smiling as she smeared jelly on her toast while Izuku sat there blushing and eating his eggs. "I hope I get to meet this young lady soon," she said with a wink as Izuku began shoveling food into his face to hurry past this awkward mother-son conversation. "I'm going to the dojo for a while. I'll be back later." "Thanks for breakfast, Mom," he said, placing his plate in the sink as he drained the juice from his cup, which quickly followed into the sink as Izuku sped to the front entrance and out the door after putting his shoes on. As 𝐻𝐿𝐼 gave a small giggle. "I can't wait to tell Hisashi," she said, smiling at her baby boy growing up. Izuku arrived at the dojo, trying to remove his mother from his thoughts as he focused on the matter at hand. Izuku slid the door to the dojo open and found Splinter sitting at the front of it drinking tea. He must have just finished his morning training. Splinter's eyes opened after setting down the tea, letting out a sigh of contentment. "Izuku, good morning. What brings you here this early?" Splinter asked as Izuku sat in front of him. "Sorry to come by so early, Mr., but I had a question only you can answer." Splinter nodded, giving Izuku the signal to proceed. Izuku took a deep breath before starting in. "I met a man last night. He was using our techniques to kill people. He murdered several men in front of me. They weren't good men, but they didn't deserve to die. I was hoping you might know who this is," Izuku asked as he looked into Splinter's glazed eyes. It seemed as if his Mr. was a million miles away. Splinter closed his eyes for a moment as he released a shaky breath. "Izuku, this isn't something we should discuss. I have nothing to say on this matter. Sorry you came here for nothing," Splinter said, rising to his feet. Izuku bit his lip, debating on whether to leave or not, but shook his head. "Sensei, please. This man killed people in front of me using our techniques and I couldn't stop him. I tried to protect one and I failed. I wasn't able to save him. Please, you have to tell me who this is," Izuku said, standing to his feet, staring at Splinter's back only for the older man to turn around. Yoshi looked into Izuku's eyes, always so expressive. The boy wore his heart on his sleeve, so Splinter could tell that this man's death affected him greatly. "Izuku, your compassion is remarkable," Splinter said before sitting back down and waving for Izuku to do the same, which he did. "The man's name is Orokusaki, and he was once my brother in training. I was older than him by a decade, but I looked at Saki as my younger brother, both training under my father. Both of us had a strong sense of justice and pursued heroics, but even then I knew without a quirk no one would accept me as a hero, so I protected this area as a vigilante while Saki went on to pursue a career as a licensed hero. Our paths split at that point. I found love in my wife 𝗀𝗃 and stopped being a vigilante, but Saki grew displeased with hero society and began exerting his own justice, killing villains instead of taking them in." Splinter rubbed his forehead at remembering these dark moments of his past. "At the time I didn't know this. I was too involved in myself to notice what was happening to my friend until 𝗀𝗃 was killed." Splinter swallowed hard, trying to keep his tears from falling, and Izuku felt his pain. He knew how important 𝗀𝗃 had been to his 𝐶𝐻𝐵. He felt awful making Splinter go through this, but it had to be done. Saki was killing people and had apparently been doing so for a long time without being caught. It was an accident, drunk driving kids. Saki came to me wanting for us to get revenge for 𝗀𝗃, but I refused. I couldn't do that to Miwa. I couldn't make my daughter an orphan, her mother killed and her father a murderer. Saki saw this as an affront to 𝗀𝐭𝐮's memory. A woman he thought of as an older sister. He killed those kids and I didn't stop him. It was only after he had done the deed did I confront him. We fought, but I couldn't do what needed to be done. I let him go and excommunicated him from our dojo, but I couldn't live with the guilt of having let him kill those kids, so I left Japan with Miwa heading for the US. I had only recently returned when your mother asked me to train you. I had my reservations, but the look on your face back then, the determination to follow your dream gave me hope, and now seeing the man you've become lets me know I made the right decision. Splinter said, placing a hand on Izuku's head. Don't do what I did. I let Saki go because of our past. Don't let the murder of those men cloud your judgment. If you choose to pursue him, do it the right way, understand? Promise me you won't break the rules for him or to catch him. Izuku stared into Splinter's amber eyes and gave a single nod. I promise, Sensei, I will bring Stain to justice the right way or not at all. You shouldn't feel guilty about choosing not to seek revenge for your wife. It was an accident, and though I never met 𝗀𝐭𝐮, I think she would be proud of your choice. He said, smiling and filling Splinter with pride as the boy stood up and left. Izuku returned to school the next day, this being his first official day as class rep. He was eager to pay back everyone's trust in him. As Aizawa walked in, Izuku led the morning greeting to their homeroom teacher. Stand, bow, good morning, Mr. Aizawa. Be seated. All students followed suit before sitting down again. Izuku breathed a sigh of relief, glad he hadn't forgotten or said anything wrong. Out of the corner of his eye, he noticed Uraraka giving him a stealthy thumbs up before Aizawa began speaking. Good morning. Now today we'll be taking a trip to one of the training fields, so get in your costumes and head out to the bus. He said simply before leaving the classroom as the students headed for their respective locker rooms. In the boys' room, the standard male camaraderie could be felt as the boys discussed what they'd done over the weekend. Ojiro looked at Izuku as the two got dressed. So how'd the dates go? Ojiro asked, keeping his voice low, but apparently not low enough as Mineta was pulled from trying to listen to the girls through the wall, zeroing in on Izuku, who he pounced on, being caught on instinct by Izuku. Mineta, what are you doing? Izuku shouted, shocked halfway through pulling on his suit as the purple midget writhed in his hand like an angry ferret. Who was your date with, Midoriya? Mineta shouted, alerting all the boys to the brewing situation. What? No way Midoriya had a date with who? Tell us. Denki said, sitting on the bench nearest Izuku as most of the male students crowded around the green-haired boy aside from Bakugo, Todoroki, and Tokoyami. Izuku looked at Ojiro, who held his hand up vertically in front of him in apology as Izuku was then swarmed with questions about who he was dating. In exact opposition to the noise the boys were making, the girls' locker room was silent as a crypt due to the thick veil of tension that emanated from two girls, Uraraka and Toru. The other girls looked on at the two slowly dressing, trying hard not to breathe too loudly. What's up with those two? Tsu asked to Momo as she zipped up her uniform and began tightening her gloves. The creation girl shook her head before. I don't know, but we can't let this continue, she said, walking over to Toru and Uraraka. Excuse me girls, I know we aren't all that close, but as vice class rep it's my job to make sure everyone in class is doing well, so what seems to be the problem? She asked as Toru and Uraraka turned towards her, radiating death and malice. Momo felt a chill run down her spine as she took a step back. No, I can't. Midoriya is counting on me to help keep this class in order. I can't let him down, she thought before stepping forward, only for Mina to slide in between the trio. Isn't it obvious? It's about a guy, she shouted, breaking Uraraka out into a blush, and judging from Toru's fiddling fingers she was also quite embarrassed. No, it's not. Uraraka objected, hurriedly getting dressed as Toru slid past the other girls and out the door. The tension having left the room completely at Mina's outburst as the girls evacuated the locker room, the last being Jiro, who pulled her earphone jack out of the wall, her face red. Midoriya had a date with who? She thought to herself as she followed her fellow females outside, meeting up with the boys as they gathered onto the bus. The last person to board being Izuku, after having made sure that no one was left behind. He climbed on and began heading towards one of the only seats open next to Tsu. He didn't notice the multiple looks of disappointment by the other girls, each having had their extra seat taken. I hope you don't mind, Azui, Izuku said as he thought about what he'd learned from Splinter and then about Stain himself, the memory of his failures still fresh in his mind. Not at all, Midoriya, and please call me Tsu. The frog girl said, looking at Izuku, noticing the dark and involved look on his face. She felt bad for him, wondering what could have the boy in such a state. Midoriya, what's wrong? You look sick, she said, drawing Izuku from his ruminating. It's nothing, Azui. Couldn't help somebody when they needed it is all. He gave her a half-truth, not wanting to tell her how he'd let someone die right in front his eyes. Were they a friend of yours? She asked, looking at him curiously as Izuku shook his head. No, I didn't know him at all. He wasn't a good person, but I think he could have been a better person if given the chance. It just SCKS I couldn't help him, he said as the eyes of that thug swam across his vision. He looked confused, as if he didn't know that he had died or why. Izuku's fellow students looked at him somberly to know that the Greenettes felt sorrow for not helping a complete stranger, one who he said wasn't a good person no less. Wow, Midoriya, that's heavy, bro, Kirishima said from his seat next to Tsu, who took Izuku's hand. Izuku, I'm sure even if you didn't help him, the fact that you tried meant a lot to him. Take solace in that, Tsu said, patting Izuku's hand before letting go, causing the Greenette to smile before Katsuki put in his opinion. Stop being such a whiny beach, Izuku. Next time try not to be such a pages, Katsuki shouted, causing the other students to sigh in exasperation. Come on, Bakugo, that's not cool, man, Kirishima said as Denki shrugged. He's just being himself, I guess. We all know Bakugo's personality is flaming SHT mixed with garbage, Denki said as Katsuki's eyes glared a hole into the electricity user. What did you say, SHT stain? Bakugo shouted as Izuku smiled, a new light in his eye that Tsu took notice of. What's with that smile, Izuku? Bakugo just laid into you pretty harshly, Tsu spoke as Izuku shook his head. That's just Katsuki's way of telling me to do better. He knows I'll wind up doing something like that again if it comes down to it, he said as Tsu touched her chin in contemplation. Mina sat across from Izuku, staring at the boy as she liked her lips. He's such a good guy. I wonder what he's hiding under all that sweetness. I hope it's something naughty, she thought to herself, rubbing her thighs together as Momo and Uraraka stared at the green-haired boy, both enamored by his strong sense of justice. Toru was a bit conflicted. She knew who Izuku was talking about, and she couldn't say she agreed with him completely. That guy had tried to assault her, and the only reason he and his friends had been there was to get revenge on Izuku for stopping him. Karma was not to be trifled with. For her part, Jiro remained stoic, but even she was touched by Izuku's fervent longing to help everyone he could. All right, that's enough. We're here. Everybody off the bus, Aizawa said as the students filed out of the bus and were greeted by none other than Rescue Hero 13. Everybody say hello to your guest instructor 13. She will be in charge of your exercises today, Aizawa explained as the class said hello to 13. It's a pleasure to meet you all and welcome you to the Unforeseen Simulation Joint, or USJ for short, 13 explained as she led the class into the massive structure in which was housed 5 different areas. Izuku could hardly believe they were still inside a building. Today's lesson will be comprised of you all carrying out mock rescue missions in each of the 5 zones, those being the mountain, landslide, conflagration, ruins, flood, and downpour. Every day there are all kinds of natural disasters ranging from earthquakes to forest fires. It is our job as heroes to use our abilities to assist the victims of these disasters. I know some of you are thinking your quirk couldn't possibly help in rescue mission, but that's not true. 13 held up one of her fingers to the class. My quirk is Black Hole, one of the most destructive forces in the universe, but I use this quirk to clear debris and remove harmful materials, but if I'm not careful I could accidentally kill someone, and that goes for any quirk. We need to think about how best to use our quirks in every given situation. Izuku nodded, taking in this information. It had to be divine fortune that today he'd be going through rescue operations after all. If he knew what he was going to learn today during Stain's attack, maybe he would have been able to handle it differently, but as 13 continued with her speech, Aizawa turned suddenly as a black shape took form in the middle of the USJ plaza. As he looked on, figures started to emerge from the steadily growing portal. The students took notice of their homeroom teacher's demeanor with Kirishima walking forward. I thought we were doing rescue op dash. Izuku held out a hand in front of his students, stopping their approach. Stay back. This isn't part of the exercise. 13. Protect the children. Kaminari tried to get a signal out to the main building. I'll hold them off, Izuku said as he pulled his goggles down over his eyes and then bounded down the stairs, engaging the foremost villains after erasing their quirks. Izuku moved towards Ida, getting the taller boy's attention. Ida, you need to get out of here and warn the teachers outside, he whispered as Ida looked at him. But Midoriya, Kaminari is already working on that, Ida said before Kaminari gave out bad news. Sorry guys, no go, there's something blocking my transmissions. We're completely cut off from the outside. The lightning blonde spoke disappointedly. See, we need you to get out of here and to warn the other teachers. You're the fastest of us after all, Izuku said as the warp gate user appeared before them. Sorry to interrupt your school day, students, but we desperately need to have a word with All Might and we're told he would be here today. But since he doesn't seem to have appeared just yet, I'll have to ask you students to keep my comrades company for a while. Stand back, students, I'll hand dash. 13 stepped forward, popping off the cap to one of her fingers and began sking the warp gate user towards her, but had to break off her attack as Kirishima and Bakugo jumped towards the villain, breaking her line of attack before inevitably being drawn into the villain's portal. How rambunctious, you all deserve a timeout, the villain spoke as he began to engulf the majority of the class. Izuku looked at Ida as he managed to save Uraraka from the portal. Remember, Ida, you need to get out of here, he shouted as he was swallowed by the darkness, only to come out seconds later above a large body of water and crashing through the water's surface. He opened his eyes, seeing nothing around him before starting to swim to the top, only to notice a swift shape moving towards him. Sorry kid, I'll try to make this quick, the shark-like villain snarled, opening his mouth wide as Izuku curled his finger. He wasn't sure if this would work underwater, but he had to try. He waited for the villain to close in, but right before he could flick his finger, Tsuyu appeared, slamming her feet into the villain's face before springing off him out of the water and dragging Izuku with her onto a nearby boat. Izuku took a large breath of air as he sat up, only to hear someone speaking before a purple body was slammed onto the deck next to him. Mineta, are you alright? Izuku said, checking to see if the boy was still conscious after a hard slam like that. He looked to be fine as Izuku turned to Azui, guessing what might have happened to make her slam him onto the deck like that. Thanks for the save, Azui, I wasn't sure how long I would have lasted without you, Izuku said as Mineta sat up, looking over the railing at the gathered water villains. I told you to call me Tsu, and don't thank me, we're not out of danger yet. They have us surrounded and outnumbered, Tsu said in her traditional monotone as Izuku cupped his chin, thinking about what to do. Look, all we have to do is stay put, the heroes will get here and they'll take care of this, Mineta said, tugging on Izuku's suit. Besides, it's not like we can do anything, look at these guys, Mineta shouted, tossing off a couple of his ball and then pointing at the futility of his attack as one of the villains made small waves with his hands to keep the ball from getting near him. Tsu looked at Mineta and in traditional Azui fashion asked, Mineta, are you sure you want to be a hero? Causing the grape-haired boy to glare at her. Shut up, frog girl, of course I want to be a hero, but we don't stand a chance. Tell her, Midoriya, Mineta said as he noticed the green-haired boy staring at the villains and their reaction to Mineta's ball. We can't wait, Mineta. Eventually either they're going to come onto the boat or more likely sink the boat and pick us off once we're in the water. We have to fight, and I might have a plan, but I can't do it without either of you. Mineta's eyes filled with tears as he stared between the green-haired duo. You two are nuts. Not all of us are badass ninja warriors like you, Midoriya. Izuku dropped down to a knee, placing his hands on Mineta's shoulders. I know that, but you two are badasses in your own way. I can't save all three of us, but if we work together we can get all of us out of this. I need you to trust me, both of you, he said, looking between Tsu and Mineta, who after a moment nodded in agreement. Good, now here's the plan. One of the villains in the water was tired of waiting as he swung his hand, creating a wave of water that sliced the boat in half, watching both halves sink right before one of the kids jumped over the railing, green lightning arcing around his body. Dumb move, kid, the attacking villain shouted, ready to slice him to pieces. Full cowl 100% smash. Izuku punched down towards the surface of the water, the pressure of his punch carving through the water, pushing it outward all the way to the floor of the lake, making a fist-shaped hole there before the water started to wash back in. Izuku was pushed upward from the force of his punch before 𝐬𝐶's tongue wrapped around his torso and pulled him along with the jumping girl as he saw 𝐼𝐼𝐻𝐻 throwing ball after ball into the swirling villains, causing them to clump together into one large mass. Izuku looked back at 𝐼𝐻𝐻, who was bleeding down the left side of his face, and smiled. "That was totally badass, 𝐼𝐻𝐻," Izuku said, giving 𝐼𝐻𝐻 a thumbs up as 𝐬𝐶 smiled. "The both of you are badass," she said as they landed near the shore of the lake, looking onto the battle between Aizawa and the villains. At the USA entrance, the remaining students looked on as 𝐻𝐻𝐿 unleashed the full power of her quirk against the warp gate, steadily skinging him towards her. "Give up, villain, I will not allow you to harm these students," she shouted, increasing her suction. The students looked on as 𝐻𝐻𝐻 stared at the front door, Izuku's words in his head. "You have to get out and warn the teachers, 𝐻𝐻𝐻." Tenya stood up looking at the door. "Midoriya put his faith in me, I can't let him down." 𝐻𝐻𝐻 felt a hand on his shoulder and saw Uraraka at his side smiling. "Deku trusts you, 𝐻𝐻𝐻, so we're going to do everything we can to help you," Uraraka said. Even though she was worried about Izuku, she had to help 𝐻𝐻𝐻 like Izuku had wanted. It was at that moment that the fight between 𝐻𝐻𝐻 and the warp gate took a turn as a portal opened behind 𝐻𝐻𝐻, turning the suction of her black hole on herself, tearing through the back of her suit, gravely injuring the hero. Uraraka pushed 𝐻𝐻𝐻 towards the door as she ran to 𝐻𝐻𝐻 along with Mina. "Go, 𝐻𝐻𝐻," she shouted as the boy turned and ran full tilt towards the door, but the warp gat was right on him. "I won't allow you to esc-. Kurohige was cut off as he was enveloped in a web of flesh by Shoji. "Get out now," Shoji shouted, squeezing tightly around the warp gate as 𝐻𝐻𝐻 ran to the door, pulling it open as he ran through. "Thank you everyone, I won't let you down," he shouted back, engaging his quirk fully and speeding away from the USJ. Aizawa stood in the middle of a circle of down villains, his hair falling back over his eyes as he breathed there. He was covered in sweat and felt as if his eyes were covered in sandpaper. He couldn't keep this up for much longer. "You're slowing down, Eraserhead. The time between your cancellations is getting bigger and bigger," the ringleader of this attack stated from behind his mask. Aizawa grit his teeth before rushing the villain and slamming an elbow into his stomach, only for his elbow to be engulfed in pain. Aizawa hissed, jumping back and looking at his elbow. It was completely destroyed, the skin having flaked off like old paint, revealing muscle fiber and bone. "What happened? My arm's useless." This lapse in focus gave an opening to the massive creature that had been accompanying the hand mask villain. Aizawa looked behind him into the creature's face before he was slammed to the ground face first as the creature slammed its massive hand on his uninjured arm, breaking it completely. "Yaya!" he screamed in pain before his face was slammed into the ground. "Oh man, I was sure All Might would be here by now," Tamura said as Kurohige appeared next to him. "I'm sorry to report, Tamura, but one of the students escaped and is no doubt bringing reinforcements. I suggest we make a retreat." Tamura glared at Kurohige, scratching his neck violently before sighing. "All right then, but I suggest we leave All Might with a parting gift, such as the death of his precious chicks," Tamura said, suddenly appearing before Izuku, 𝐼𝐻𝐻𝐻 and 𝐬𝐶, his hands reaching out for 𝐬𝐶 and 𝐼𝐻𝐻𝐻, and after having seen what it did to Aizawa's elbow, Izuku was filled with sick dread, but right as Tamura touched 𝐬𝐶, nothing happened. "You really are so cool, Eraserhead," Tamura said, looking over his shoulder at Aizawa and grinning broadly. Izuku took this moment to attack, launching from the water in full cowl and channeling 20% of One for All in his fist. "That should be more than enough to lay this guy," he thought to himself as his fist struck something, kicking up dust and sending the water receding from the coastline, dragging 𝐼𝐻𝐻𝐻 and 𝐬𝐶 away from him and the villains. The dust soon receded, revealing the form of Nomu standing there, not having moved at all from the strong punch he'd taken to the gut. Izuku grit his teeth as he moved to jump back, only to be stopped by the iron grip Nomu had on his forearm. Izuku could feel his bones straining under Nomu's strength before he was lifted off his feet and slammed to the ground. He felt his arm jerk at an excruciating angle, signaling his broken bones. Izuku tried to pull free from Nomu's grip, going all in with 100% of one for all, but he couldn't budge the monster's immense strength as he was lifted into the air again and slammed to the ground once more, coughing up. 𝐻𝗱𝗚 and Mayonetta were paralyzed in the face of Nomu's brutality as it proceeded to punch Izuku's body deeper and deeper into the ground. Izuku's vision grew dim, the pain a far-off feeling as the color drained from his vision, leaving him in a world of black. Izuku looked around at the black atmosphere of where he was and remembered this place from his dream. He looked up as the sounds of footsteps could be heard. Izuku turned towards the sound and saw a small red light coming towards him, growing bigger by the moment until it was revealed that the light was coming from a man. His body glowed a brilliant red hue as he soon bathed the entire area in red, including the once black parts of Izuku's body were now dyed in the man's color. The man had a slim muscular build, dressed in blue trousers with large cuffs and a yellow sash around his waist, sandals and an open long-sleeved red button-down cardigan. Topping his messy black hair was a straw hat with a red band across it. He had a wide grin on his face, crinkling the scar under his left eye. The most eye-catching aspect of this man was the X-shaped burn scar across his chest. "Well, looks like I was able to get here before the others could stop me. Shishishishi." The man laughed as he sat down in front of Izuku cross-legged. "I'm Luffy, the sixth holder of One for All, known as the Pirate King in my day and me, and you are going to bust up that bird brain something good," he shouted, slamming his fist into his other hand. Nomu walked away from its victim towards Shigaraki, unable to see the red steam that was wafting from the boy's body. All Might leaned against the back of the couch in his true form he'd been resting on since he'd gotten to UA that morning. He'd foolishly gone past his limit this morning and couldn't make it to class, but worst of all, he's being held captive by Principal Nizu and his long-winded speeches. Now All Might had immense respect for the principal, but this was bordering on torture. "All Might, are you listening?" Nizu asked, having climbed onto the back of couch to stare Toshi in the eye. All Might jumped, having been roused from his inner turmoil, coughing up a bit of blood moving so suddenly. "Of course, Principal Nizu, I was just thinking maybe it's time I head out to these, make an appearance at least," All Might said, transforming into his buff form as he opened the lounge door. "Oh, very well, All Might, I'm surprised I was able to hold you here this long, but go ahead," Principal Nizu said, sipping his tea as All Might gave a wave and dashed out of the room before the principal changed his mind. "If I hurry, I can maybe even give a few tips on rescue operations," All Might thought to himself as he put on even more speed. Izuku looked at the man called Luffy before him and pet an eyebrow. "King of the pirates, what's that, Maya? Pirates are evil, aren't they? Why would someone entrust One for All to a pirate?" he thought to himself as Luffy stood up, throwing a few punches, completely unaware of Izuku's quandary, and because Izuku's body wasn't completely formed in this world, he couldn't say anything. Luffy looked at the boy and smiled again. "Don't worry, kid, I'm going to help you out. My quirk is totally the best to beat that guy to a pulp. My body's RBBC," he said, pulling his cheek nearly a foot from his face before letting it snap back into place. Izuku's eyes nearly shot from his skull at the ridiculousness of Luffy's quirk. "So blunt force doesn't work on me, but I'm not sure what exactly it'll be like for you. One for All has been boosting all our quirks while storing them, so my quirk might be a little unwieldy at first, but that's why I'm here. I'll guide you with it, giving you all my knowledge, and together we'll send that guy flying." Luffy held out his hand to Izuku, who looked at it for a moment. He didn't really understand what was going on, but all he needed to know was that this guy was going to help him protect his friends from villains, and that was good enough for him. For the first time since discovering this place, Izuku was able to move and gripped Luffy's hand firmly. Tamura Shigaraki was clapping his hands as Nomu moved towards him, his fists coated in the blood of that boy. "Haha, well done, Nomu," Tamura said, clapping like an excited child, having watched some amazing stunt be performed. "That'll teach these kids to respect their elders." Tamura was interrupted from his gloating as an explosion of steam could be seen from the hole Izuku had been pounded into. A tall pillar of red energy wafted from it like steam as a figure stood in the middle. The steam was so thick it could even be seen from the entrance. "What is that?" Mina asked, squinting her eyes as she looked on with the others. Mineta and 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐴, who had climbed out of the water and had been trying to sneak close enough for 𝐬𝐮 to grab Midoriya's body from the hole until that powerful red steam had erupted from the crater. What is the dash? Tamura couldn't see what happened, but suddenly Nomu's hand was in front of him and he was splattered with the creature's BLD. Nomu, what are you doing? He shouted angrily, trying to clean the BLD from his face, only to see Nomu's hand having been completely destroyed and was in the process of regeneration. It was then that Tamura got a good look at Izuku. His suit was destroyed, leaving him topless with shredded breaths. Izuku's arms and legs were coated in a reddish-black sheen that terminated right before his shoulders. Izuku's green hair was wafting above his head like fire. Izuku released a breath, steam ejecting from his mouth as he looked at Nomu, whose fist had just regenerated with the creature giving a bird-like screech. Tamura had no idea what had happened to this boy, but Nomu was meant to kill All Might. This kid didn't have it. Just give it up, brat, nothing you do will work. Nomu has regeneration and shock absorption, not to mention ungodly strength. Not even All Might can beat him. Tamura laughed before pointing at Izuku. Kill him, then. The creature bounded toward Izuku as if struck by a W. Midoriya, get out of the way. 𝐬𝐮 shouted, not wanting her friend to be hurt anymore, but Izuku either couldn't hear her or chose to ignore her advice as he raised his left hand up, palm out, as if telling Nomu to stop before he pulled his right hand back, folding the first two joints of his fingers inward. In his head, Izuku heard Luffy speak. Just wait for him, line him up with the tip of your left index finger, keep him there, and then fire. Izuku waited a moment. Right as Nomu got within striking distance of him, there was a sound like a WHP crack and Nomu went flying backwards, the ground around Izuku and Nomu cracking under the force of the attack. Play this /H9GPQBSSVK, Mamba Smash. Izuku said right as he seemingly disappeared from sight. Nomu moved its hands into the ground to slow its flying body, leaving 2 furrows in the ground before coming to a stop and standing up. Izuku appeared above Nomu, placing the soles of his feet together and kicked downward towards Nomu, who punched upward, the two attacks clashing as wind swirled around the impact. Spear smash! Izuku shouted as Nomu reached forward with his other hand, looking to grab Izuku's legs, only for the boy to kick off the giant's fist and land a few yards away from the beast, the two staring at one another. Izuku stretched his leg back before whipping it forward and kicking Nomu in the knee, shattering his skull knee pad and bending the joint backward. But it seemed Nomu didn't even feel the pain as he fell to the ground and grabbed hold of Izuku's leg and began swinging the boy around in a circle, slamming him into the trees of the small forest they were in before pulling Izuku toward himself. Block now! Izuku heard as he brought his arms in front of him in an X, watching as Nomu's fist impacted his arms. Izuku expected to hear his bones break once again, but instead Nomu's fist sunk into his arms before he was thrown upward towards the ceiling. Shishishishi one for all really is amazing, it somehow made my RBB quirk tougher than it was before. Luffy spoke in Izuku's mind. So it's more like the vulcanized RBB on tires then. Izuku spoke, getting a better grasp of his power now. Yeah, like that now, turn around and dig your hands into the ceiling. Izuku spun midair on Luffy's command and slammed into the ceiling, his arms sinking into themselves to cushion the impact as Izuku hung there for a moment before jumping to the side to avoid Nomu, who had launched himself into the ceiling after him. Now you've got him, throw your fist back as far as you can and then let him have it. Izuku nodded, throwing his right arm back and then yanked it forward as Nomu started climbing over to him, leaving himself completely open as Izuku went to slam his fist into his face. Nomu dodged to the side. Oh no, he dodged it! Luffy shouted, but Izuku felt like he could still hit Nomu with his attack. No, I believe in you, one for all, there's nothing we can't hit. Python smash! He shouted as red electricity crackled along Izuku's arm, turning it at 2 angles to slam into Nomu's back, driving him from the ceiling. The massive creature began to fall. That was amazing, now finish him with this. Drop from the ceiling and throw your arm out behind you and twist it like a corkscrew. This was my trusty rifle smash. Luffy said in Izuku's mind as the green-haired boy followed his lead. In his mind, Izuku had felt that the form he'd taken was best suited for the snake style he'd learned from 𝐶𝐻. Being able to stretch and strike quickly from unexpected directions was the epitome of the style, and as such he'd named all his attacks after snakes, and this one would be no different. Izuku's arms stretched to the limit as he spun it around before pulling it back towards him, his fist unwinding at blistering speeds, his arm beginning to glow with the friction of the air before bursting into flame. All of 𝐻𝐻𝐸 looked up at the glowing figure that was Izuku as he fell from the ceiling like a meteor on re-entry. Stop music. Katsuki and Kirishima looked up from the villains they'd trounced at the bright figure in the sky. "Is that Midoriya?" Kirishima asked, covering his eyes to get a better look as Katsuki stood next to him, his fists clenched, an angry smile on his face. "Izuku," he growled, staring at his once victim moving ahead of him even more. Todoroki looked up from his position in the landslide zone, staring up at the figure in the air. "Midoriya, you're full of surprises, aren't you?" he stated as unknown to him Toru, who had been hiding behind a rock as not to get frozen, stared at Izuku and shook in awe. "Just how awesome are you, Izuku?" she asked herself. Momo and Jiro, who were being threatened by one of the villains, looked up at the false star in the sky, as did the electrical villain who was holding Kaminari hostage. Taking this moment, Jiro connected her jack to the speaker on her leg and blasted a sound wave into the guy, knocking him out and letting the stupefied Kaminari free. Jiro smiled as she helped the electrical user up. "That's our class rep for ya, helping us out whenever he can," Jiro said with a blush on her face, much like Momo, who clutched her chest. "A guy like that is depending on me. Oh, what am I going to do?" Momo thought as she bit her lip. At the entrance, all the students looked at Izuku taking on the creature that had savaged their teacher so badly and cheered. "Go Midoriya, you've got this, hun," Mina shouted as Achiko smiled, tears in her face. "You never stop moving forward, Izuku. How's a girl supposed to keep up?" she asked amidst the cheering. Resume music. Izuku stared down at Nomu as he closed in his fist, rocketing forward. "Sidewinder smash," he shouted as his fist connected with Nomu's gut, exploding in flame as the monster was dropped to the ground in a massive plume of smoke, with Izuku landing next to him, his springy legs absorbing the shock completely. Tamura and Kurogiri stared at the boy as he stood there seemingly victorious, only for the rubble of Nomu's crash to be thrown away as the burnt creature stood up, beginning to heal the damage. "What, he's still standing?" Izuku said as his body began steaming more. His muscles felt as if they were on fire. "We've almost reached our limit, but we can't stop now. We're so close," Luffy said in his head as Midoriya raised his fists, hearing Tamura laughing not too far away. "Didn't I tell you, fool? Whatever you do, Nomu will heal no matter how hard you hit him, he'll absorb it. He's the ultimate creation of my 𝐴𝐻𝐸 made to kill All Might," Tamura shouted out gleefully. "I can't beat high dash." Izuku was cut off by Luffy shouting in his head. "Yes, you can. Nobody is invincible. If he can heal, we'll beat him until he can't. If he can absorb hits, then we'll hit him more than he can take. We don't stop, never give in." Luffy shouted, his unbending will infecting Izuku as he smiled, clenching his fists. Energy crackled around the boy's fists, forming into the heads of two snakes before throwing them forward again and again, each faster than before, until it looked as if Izuku's arms began multiplying. Noma held up its arms to block the blows as it continued to advance on Izuku, but there were just too many getting through. For every one Noma blocked, 10 more got through until his encroachment was halted and then began pushing him back, each fist hitting like a missile. "Hydra Aya." Izuku pulled both his hands back as far as they'd go before hurling them forward, with the two large snake heads slamming into Nomu's chest. Smash. Nomu was slammed hard, the ground shattering underneath him as he was lifted up and flew backwards, slamming into the wall of the USJ before rocketing through it outside and far away. Izuku watched the receding figure of Nomu as the world slowly faded to black around him. He could hear Luffy's voice in his head, fading with each passing moment. "Shishishi, nice one, kid. I'm glad I was able to fight with you. Don't stop here, we're all waiting to see how far you go." Izuku's body fell to the ground, the steam from his body finally stopped. Shigaraki and Kurogiri looked at the unconscious boy in front of them. "No, it can't be, that's impossible," Shigaraki shouted, scratching at his neck, blood flowing from the numerous scrapes. He couldn't have beat Nomu. Shigaraki's hands fell from his neck as he started to move forward slowly at first before going into a dead run as he advanced on Izuku's body, his hands outstretched before feeling a massive impact on his side, throwing him far to the left. He rolled on the ground before being caught by 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨 and looking at the frowning face of the #1 hero. I appreciate you boys' help, but I'll take it from here. All Might spoke, alerting the two villains to the two boys that were standing on either side of the unconscious Midoriya, Bakugo and Todoroki. I would be ashamed of myself if I allowed our class rep to be killed before my eyes, said Todoroki, a small ice wall protecting the unconscious form of Izuku as Bakugo growled. I wasn't here for shitty Izuku, I just wanted another chance to blow their buttes up, shouted Bakugo, casting a glance at Izuku's unconscious form. All Might wanted nothing more than to smile right now. Izuku had went above and beyond the call of his station, but All Might had expected nothing less. Nevertheless, I'd appreciate it if you two got Aizawa and Midoriya far from here while I deal with these two. All Might growled, turning to Shigaraki and 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨 only to see the two of them retreating into a portal. We've lost Tamura, we should leave, 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨 cautioned as Tamura glared at All Might and then at the shielded form of Izuku as the portal closed behind him. All Might rose from his fighting stance. He'd wanted nothing more than to chase after those two, but Aizawa and the rest of the class were his priority. I'll be back, students, All Might said before disappearing, only to start reappearing in the other zones of the USJ, proceeding to incapacitate every villain there. By the time the other teachers arrived with Ida, All Might was tossing the last of the villains onto an already massive pile. Man, looks like the party's over, Present Mike said as he and the other teachers began to look over the students for injuries. Luckily, it seemed that the only injuries were Aizawa, 13 and Midoriya, all of whom were rushed to Recovery Girl. This is terrible, All Might. To think that UA was invaded by villains. If not for you getting here when you did, this could have been much worse, Principal 𝐻𝐿 said, looking over the students. But it seems that this experience has given them much knowledge in what it means to be a hero. All Might shook his head, kneeling down to the principal and whispering, That's not the case, 𝐻𝐿 sir. I only arrived here moments before you did. The students did the heavy lifting, none more so than Izuku Midoriya from what I'm told. He fought the creature called Nomu and defeated him. 𝐻𝐿's face didn't change all that much, but for All Might, who had known the mysterious creature for so long, he could tell he was shocked. I see, so that's what happened. We called the police on the way over and they just informed me they found a large creature far from here. I'm guessing that creature is the Nomu. I think we should pay Midoriya a visit, 𝐻𝐿 said, climbing onto All Might's shoulder, but before the #1 hero could leave, he was stopped by the fellow students of Class 1A. How is Midoriya and Mr. Aizawa doing? Asked Yaoyorozu, stepping into her role as Vice Republic. Yeah, Midoriya went all in like a man, we gotta see him, Kirishima spoke, pounding his chest. S'il vous plaît, I must wish him well. Seeing my twinkling visage will no doubt ensure a speedy recovery, Aoyama said, swishing his cape back and forth. Principal 𝐻𝐿 raised a paw to quell the anxious student body. Children, please, there will be time to see Midoriya after Recovery Girl gives the okay, and we've spoken with him. For now, please follow ectoplasm back to class. Disappointedly, the students followed 𝐻𝐿's orders and were led back to the school building by said teacher as All Might and 𝐻𝐿 went to the nurse's office, finding Recovery Girl there administering the final touches to a groggy Izuku. All Might, you're okay, Izuku said, trying to stand only to fall back on the bed. Easy there, young Midoriya, you've pushed yourself really hard today, All Might said, helping Izuku lay properly in the bed. That's an understatement. He's completely exhausted, so whatever questions you have for him will have to wait, and I need to speak with you most of all, Mr. Symbol of Peace. I've called a cab for the boy and one of the teachers will make sure he gets home safe, Recovery Girl said, whacking All Might in the back of the knee. Why, yes ma'am, All Might said, rubbing his leg as he began to follow Chio before Izuku called out to him. All Might, before you go, I have to tell you something. All Might turned around at the boy while his eyes drooped. I saw one of them, All Might, the previous users of One for All. I saw the Pirate King, he said before nodding off. All Might looked at Izuku, unsure what he meant. The Pirate King, who's that? 𝐻𝐿 asked All Might, who shook his head. I have no idea, sir, but I do believe Izuku when he said he met a former user of One for All. All Might crossed his arms in thought before Chio coughed, gaining his attention. First things first, gentlemen. Izuku is in a state of complete exhaustion after my healing. His muscles are the biggest priority. Before I healed them it was as if they'd been torn apart, but I managed to heal them. From what I was told from the teachers by the students, he should be more injured. Broken bones, ruptured organs, but nothing. I have no idea how to explain it," she said, sitting down and tapping her cane as the two males took this new information in and looked at the boy in the table even more amazed. Shigaraki walked into the mahjong bar and grabbed the nearest chair, reducing it to dust before kicking over a table as Kurogiri sighed, watching the tantrum before their MST spoke, ending the childish tirade. "Tomura, what's wrong?" All for One asked as Tomura looked at the screen in the back of the room. Nomo failed MSTR. Not only did he never see All Might, he was taken out by some kid with more than one quirk. All for One frowned from where he was as his doctor questioned Shigaraki. "My Nomu defeated by a child. Impossible, he was perfect." "Well, perfection lost you, quack," Tomura shouted before All for One spoke again. "What quirks did he have, Tomura?" All for One asked as Tomura sat at the bar tapping his fingers against the surface. "Strength for one, and he could stretch really far." All for One frowned deeply as memories of a man in a straw hat ran through his. He rubbed his stomach as the memory of numerous fists impacting him was dredged from the depths of his mind. Izuku slowly opened his eyes as he looked towards the ceiling of his own room and not the nurse's office. He turned his head to the side, noticing a plate with a sandwich on it and a glass of water. He smiled as his stomach growled. He sat up to satisfy his hunger when he noticed he was still in his school uniform and there was something in his breath's pocket. He remembered that his hero costume had been completely destroyed, so obviously someone had dressed him in his school uniform before sending him home. He reached in, feeling a bundle of cloth, and pulled it out as he turned on the lamp next to his bed, unfurling the bundle only to come face to face with a pair of purple and black panties. "WWHWT?" he shouted before covering his mouth, hoping he hadn't woke his mother as he looked at the underwear in his hands. There was a note inside the underwear that he fished out, noticing how moist the paper was in his hands and blushing furiously as he peeled the folded note apart and looked at the words on it. "Give these back when you're ready. I won't wear any others until you do. Don't make me wait, or do if that's what you're into." Izuku swallowed hard as he stared at the note and the panties in his hands. There was an address on the note, and he knew it wasn't from Toru, whose house he'd been to several times, so whose were they?